Here we go. Go ahead. Good evening. This is a meeting of the Police Oversight Board for Albuquerque. My name is Joanne Fine, and I'm chair. And I welcome you to this meeting. We have a lot to cover, so I would like it if we just get started. So the Pledge of Allegiance, Eric, will you lead us in that?
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Eric. The mission statement for the Police Oversight Board is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. First item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Are there any changes that anybody needs made to the agenda? I would accept a motion to approve it.
My motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, approved. Public comments. Michelle, did we get any? There aren't any. Okay,
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, did you read the mission statement?
I did.
I'm sorry.
Public comments, there are none, so we will keep going. Discussion. Nicole, I'd like to hear from the board member.
The minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss that? Oh, I did. I apologize. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any corrections to the minutes? Motion to approve?
So moved.
I
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Michelle, I'll sign them when you're ready. Discussion. I would like to hear from the board members that went to NACOL, and Johnny, I know you did, Dr. Ring, Leonard, and then whoever else went. If you just give us a thumbnail of what you got out of it.
It was a great experience. We met a lot of people, a lot of good networking. It was very nice to be as a group. It's kind of, I felt really like we were more cohesive, learned a lot about each other. That was the good part. Like I said, a lot of networking, a lot of note-taking, a lot of pictures that I took to bring back, a lot of work that I still need to do in regards to going over a lot of the information. There was some great presentations and there was some not so good presentations. And I really didn't get a chance to see the city, but I had a beautiful view from my room.
Dave, will you start with telling the public what the NACOL conference is?
NACOL is the National Association of Citizen Oversight of Law Enforcement. It took me at least 6 months to learn that. But
What did you get out of it?
I think, learned that we're not in it alone. There are about 160 other entities in our country that have some form of police oversight by civilians. And I would say, based on the third year of going to it, we're a little bit ahead of the curve. Sometimes we're very frustrated here that things are not moving faster and so forth and so on, but in relation to the nation as a whole, I would say we're in the top third in terms of having made significant progress. So that was kind of affirming. I enjoyed learning that.
Thank you. Leonard.
Okay. My biggest take, or the best take, is those hallway conversations that we had. You got to meet a lot of people doing the work and learned a lot. I agree with both Johnny and Dr. Ring. We're ahead of the curve. We're doing the right thing. So I was impressed.
Okay. I know you and I didn't go. Did you go?
Yes, I went. I agree with William. It was really great to meet other individuals. but I was also impressed how advanced we were compared to two others. They don't even have their financing together, and they're really struggling. So it really made me feel good about what we're doing here and how much we've accomplished.
Good.
I would say it was a very good refresher. It was a good refresher in terms of the enthusiasm and the purpose of why we're here as a board. Also, as we are ahead of the curve, as I got to agree with Dr. Ring, but would caution for patting ourselves on the back too soon. We still got a lot of ways, but it was encouraging to know that we have some good methods down and we're on the right track.
Good. Dr. Gass?
This was my first NACO conference, and I'm speaking in my basest voice. And I was impressed with, first of all, the staff of the organizations that attended and the board members that attended. There were a lot of staff that were very enthusiastic about what they did, and I had a number of conversations with people who were directly involved. And for example, Denver has a very good program, an interesting program, where they have oversight of both the jail system and the police department. And I think there's some good contacts that we could have with Denver, because they're in proximity, and I'm sure they have, there's some connection between us and Denver in general. But in addition to that, I was really impressed with the number of police officials, officers who showed up in the higher ranks especially, that participated in the panel discussions and in the workshops, and indicated that they really did get the message that police reform was necessary. And I think their strength was that they were able to communicate with the community. And in any case, I talked to I was very impressed with the undersheriff for Las Vegas, and I know APD has been there to get to learn some things that Las Vegas is doing. And I think some of the processes that we have or that APD has are from Las Vegas. But the undersheriff there, and I can't remember his name, I think it's McMillan or something similar, really seems to understand that this is about relationships and community relationships, especially. And he's, I was ready to hire him, but.
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about Las Vegas, Nevada, not New Mexico.
That's correct, Las
Okay.
Vegas, Nevada, right.
Okay. Mr. Harness, would you like to share your thoughts about NACO?
Good evening, Madam Chair. I echo what the members of the board said, but I think what stuck out for me was the presentation on the early intervention systems. There were 3 social scientists from Albany, New York, who, through their research, which is still ongoing, believe that the early intervention systems are ineffective for identifying and helping officers that are in crisis and problem officers. I thought that was a very interesting presentation, along with the presentation of oversight agencies that have to deal with collective bargaining agreements. That was a good session as well.
Good. I'm curious to know about, and it doesn't need to happen here, but I'd be curious to hear from anyone who has any good news about what other organizations are doing in the area of their website, because I think our website needs a lot of work. And the information is there, but it's really hard. It's not very user-friendly. So I'm interested in if you've seen or if you come across websites that are about oversight, police oversight in any community that you think are well-structured and easily handled by the public. I really think that would be helpful to us. So please keep your eyes open for that. And if you know of any from this conference, please let me know. We are up to accident data presentation. Mr. Wilhelm, may I start by saying I'm really glad you're here. And Lieutenant Sanchez is here. We've worked closely together. Major Tyler is here. There she is. There are a lot of people who have been helpful in this. As you know, we had a report that was less than adequate, and Deputy Chief Garcia and Major Tyler brought in the right people to pull together the data that we could use to understand traffic accidents involving police officers. We have been interested in this for some time. Leonard and Dr. Ring both have been the ones pushing this over time and well before there were any accidents that made the newspaper. So it was a concern to us, and we are grateful and happy to hear what the police department, what their yeoman's effort put together. For those of you who may be in the media, there are copies of the full report available for you here so that you can have that. I know you're going to be taking notes fast and furious, but just so you know, you will have a hard copy of the report, and Mr. Wilhelm is going to give us a summary of that report, which is, I think, 30-something pages long. So this is a summary, not the drill down, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to reiterate a couple things, first off, for those of you who don't know me, I am TJ Wilhelm, and I'm the manager of the Real-Time Crime Center. For those of you who don't know what the Real-Time Crime Center is, basically our job is all about getting information in the hands of officers so they can make decisions, and also getting information to them real time as they respond to calls for service so they know what they're heading into. We have a wonderful team of analysts. We have 6 analysts, and including 1 contract analyst, and we have 2 PhDs on our staff that are quite talented. And to reiterate what you said earlier, Deputy Chief Garcia contacted me at the end of June and asked that I task the RTC to conduct an analysis of APD-involved crashes. And we immediately got working on it. And as you said, I've got every slide. I'm going to quickly go through every slide for the sake of time. But certainly, if there are any questions, we're more than available to do so. So the first thing we did was with this study, what we do with every study is sit down with the customer, if you will. And in this case, the customer who's wanting the analysis is the Police Oversight Board. So I did have the pleasure of sitting down with Ms. Fine and Dr. Garcia, as well as Mr. Harness, to develop a scope of work. And after we sat down, this is what the Police Oversight Board wanted to know. And that was the number of crashes to police-issued vehicles. You want to know the number of sworn officers, number of crashes involving injuries, number of preventable crashes, number of officers involved in multiple crashes, amount paid in liability per year, amount of vehicle damage paid per year, and how Albuquerque compares to other cities. As the analysis went on, we discovered immediately that there was an increase in preventable employee-involved crashes and started looking into other possible causes and included them into the study. So in addition to what the Police Oversight Board requested, we started to look at the number of miles driven by APD. We started to look at calls for service, priority 1 calls for service, all crashes that occurred in the city, and the average years of experience per employee that was involved in the city. And the reason why we did this is because everyone is going to ask, okay, we've seen an increase, but why? And so we worked hard and diligent to try to give you the data for you to make your own determination. And I'll talk a little bit about correlation and why we weren't comfortable making an absolute correlation. But a lot of your opinions are to yourself after you see the data. The data sources that we used, and it's very important that we always state our data sources. We had a compiled list of all claims kept by risk management. We had a compiled list of all findings from the APD Fleet Accident Review Board. We even went as far as getting the recorded miles reported by APD employees. When they fill up their gas tanks, they have to enter in their mileage. We collected all that data from the Department of Finance and Administration. We compiled data of all traffic crash reports kept by the APD Traffic Division, and that's any crash involving any citizen in the city of Albuquerque. And the reason why we did that is because it goes to environment. Is there environmental factors that could be at play, such as weather, road conditions, traffic patterns, and what have you? Calls for service data kept by APD Emergency Communications Report, FBI Uniform Crime Report on officer staffing was included, bid sheets kept by operations review. We even went as far as we had to by hand pull the hire dates from the city HR system to find out an average years of experience. And the last thing we did was we sent out questionnaires to hundreds of police agencies in the country that was included in this analysis.
Excuse me just one second. Michelle, could you give us our copies of this? They're in the folder. I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm sorry. Go right ahead, sir. I got you. I'm sorry. My apologies.
No worries, Madam Chair. It's important that with any analysis, we let the people know who are viewing it what our margin of error and disclaimers are. And that's important that I want to point out to you that there are some margin of error here. The 2017 data that you're going to see is a projection using actual data collected for the first months of the year. Simple, first 6 months times 2. We did not do anything to extrapolate month to month to month. We just made it very simple. Medical liability and property damage paid for 2016 and 17, they're very likely to increase as claims get settled, okay? Claims paid are as of July 27th of 2017. That is a floating number. So as the city negotiates, if you were to pull it today, it could very well be different. All crashes and miles driven include all police vehicles. We cannot differentiate between marked, unmarked, and vehicles driven by civilians. And so all the data we're going to present today is all APD employee data. It is not APD officer data. The number of officers fluctuates on a daily basis due to hiring and attrition. So I need to have that disclaimer as well. Now, some crashes provided by the Fleet Accident Review Board did not have a finding, nor did it go through the board process. Some crashes have yet to be heard by the board. Others involve parked vehicles, and it is unclear looking at historical records why there is not a finding listed. We went back and we had to look at paper records to extract some of this data. And at times, there was nothing listed. We did include that statistic that counted as a crash. But it's important that you know that there were some that did not have a finding to it. And I want to make sure that that's clear to the board. With any data set, I just basically real quickly give you the data, okay, anytime we do an analysis. Here's the data that we're working with, and this is the data that's going to be supported in the next coming slides that you're going to see. One of the things I do want to note is that with any slide, with addition to the disclaimers and the margins of errors that I've already presented, please also take a note at the notes at the bottom of each slide for any type of data extrapolations or any anomalies that might occur in the data. Comparing ourselves to the change compared to the previous year, we had a 46% increase in APD-involved crashes. We had a 30% increase in all APD preventable crashes. Couple factors that we talked about earlier, everyone in the city of Albuquerque was involved in 13% more crashes, including all citizens. 6% miles driven. And to give you an idea, back in 2012, we were driving 8 million miles. We drove 11 million in 2016. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the miles driven, and I'm going to address that. Property damage paid as of to date for 2016 is 16%. Our total number of officers went down 2%. And I know that's going to be a question. I'm going to address it. We've got fewer officers but more crashes. But believe it or not, there might be a correlation there, and I'll explain that. Officers who participate in the field services bid went down 2%. Priority 1 calls went up 3%, and we're projecting it will continue to go up to 5%. And all dispatch calls, including the 3s, the 2s, and even the 6s and the BOLOs, went down by negative 1%. Here's a quick graph that shows all APD-involved crashes since 2013 and what we're projecting for 2017. And I'm going to quickly go through these, and so I apologize for the sake of time. Preventable APD-involved crashes. That's what it looks like over the 5-year study period. Now, this is the percentage. So although we've been involved in more crashes, our actual percentage of crashes that were preventable has actually gone down. At one point in 2013, we were as high as around 70-80%, but in 2016, 46% of our crashes were deemed preventable by the Fleet Accident Review Board. I do want to note that after 2013, and Lieutenant Sanchez can answer this a little bit more thoroughly, there was a policy change in how officers responded to calls, which could be a factor into why we saw a decrease in the percentage of preventable calls.
I want to ask a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The preventable crashes are determined, what are the criteria for determining whether or not it's preventable?
To sum up APD policy, and if I need to go further, I can have Lieutenant Sanchez come up here, is that any crash, any minor damage, the standard here in Albuquerque is very low. So if an officer backs up and lightly hits another car and there's minimal damage, they still have to report it. In other jurisdictions, they would not report that. But any crash, any type of collision in which there was a factor that the officer wasn't following policy or whatnot would be deemed preventable.
Okay.
Okay. APD sworn officer count, real quickly, there's where we're at. That 844 number is as of June 22nd, 2017. I tried to take a number right at the end of the 6-month reporting period for 2017. These are APD-involved crashes. One of the things you asked of us is that we want to know the seriousness of the crashes. These are crashes, this is just a strict number, these are the number of crashes in which risk management has deemed that they might have to pay some sort of medical expenses on the crashes, into which there might be some sort of liability at stake. This is not necessarily the number of crashes involving injuries. And as I will address, I don't have that data. And that's an issue that we're going to address. And thanks to Lieutenant Sanchez, we already have at APD. This is the duty status of the APD employee. Duty status wasn't start being kept by these records until mid-2015. I went through, or excuse me, our team went through all the crashes, and we found that for 2016, 207 of them were on duty, 16 were off duty. I had 26 crashes that said unknown, 55 that said blank. On-duty preventable was 104, and we found off-duty preventable 5. I wanted to include those 26 and 55 in here so you know that there are crashes in which we do not have a duty status listed on them.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This refers to, in a previous slide, you talked about not having, there were things that weren't filled out in the report that
That's
you
not
saw.
I'm sorry.
And this also is unknown and blank. So is that something that you can address, that the department plans to address? Because that could be a cover-up or could just be sloppy.
Absolutely, and it's already being addressed. And I was going to say this at the end. First off, I really want to thank all of you for this, because there's a lot of things that we learned at the department due to this process. And we need to get better with how we store the data and our availability to be able to analyze it. And Lieutenant Sanchez had a meeting on Tuesday with numerous different divisions to address this issue already, so that we can have an analyst look at this data real time, and so that we can spot these errors. But it wasn't a matter of, for the injuries, them not filling out the proper form. We quite frankly don't have a method of having a form electronically to check the box that says there were injuries. We just don't. We would have to pull each and every single individual crash report in order to figure out what that is.
On the blanks piece, where missing information is missing, as it relates to officer-involved accidents, it would be interesting to know if a sample data of regular accidents not involving police officers had a similar problem, and you'd be able to compare those two.
Right.
See what I'm saying? Future, just a future thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. APD employees involved in multiple crashes. So what we did was, in blue, you can see that represents the number of preventable crashes they were in that 4-year period, or excuse me, 3.5-year or 4.5-year period. So we had 63 officers in 4.5 years were in 2 preventable crashes, 15 were in 3 preventable crashes, and 2 were in 4 preventable crashes from 2013 to 2017. Okay, so that's for 4.5 years. Now, just taking a single year, okay, during that period, we had 24 officers who were involved in 2 preventable crashes in a single year, and we had 5 officers who were involved in 3 preventable crashes in a single year during that period as well. One of the things I do want to make sure that we note is that if you're in the 15 column, you're not in the 63 column, so it's not cumulative.
Okay, and at some point, somebody will address for us what will happen in this. I mean, because we're trying to make those who are having difficulty with accidents solve that problem with the training or whatever. So somebody will report that. This is just the data right now.
Absolutely. At this point, this is the data and the policies that's recommended from the board, and where operations review goes is going to be using the data to make those decisions.
Cool. Thank you.
I also included, and this wasn't requested, but I just get curious and I love data. So we included a pin map of every single APD employee crash in the city of Albuquerque. You can see the dots on the map. So dots are a little bit hard to read. So something that we do in crime analysis, we do heat maps of where crime occurs. Well, instead of where crime occurs, we did a heat map of APD involved crashes. This shows us that we are seeing a large density of crashes that are occurring in the Valley Area Command as well as in the Southeast Area Command. If I were to take our crime maps and overlay this, it would pretty much mirror what we're seeing in terms of crime. So crashes are occurring, it appears, at this point, where crimes occur.
And is there a pursuit? Well, that's a priority one, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be connected to the priority one data.
Correct.
Okay.
This is I included this. There was nothing really outstanding here about this data, but we did go through by hand, and for each of these crashes, and we're dealing with over 1,000 crashes, we actually wrote down the year each employee was hired. And you can see there that there's the average years of experience for the employees. I included what our overall average was as of that July 27th date. So we're looking at about the average experience, not age, of officers is between 7 to 8 years that are involved in collisions. Now this is key, types of crashes, because the logical question is going to be, well, what type of crashes we're dealing with? And I've actually done some more research looking at other studies in other jurisdictions, and the trend that I've noticed is that almost every agency is reporting, looking at previous studies that have been done over decades, that one of the number one causes of the types of crashes is backing up. And as you can see, 23% of all of our crashes during this study period was due to officers backing up. And we actually saw, if you look at 2016 compared to 2015, a sharp increase in backing up collisions. The majority of backing up collisions are preventable. These are all crashes in the city limits of Albuquerque, and this would go to environmental factors. So, I'm sorry, did you have a question, Doctor?
Yes, sir. In regard to the types of crashes, it might be interesting to fold this data against the data from insurance companies in terms of whether or not there's something unique about officer-involved crashes as compared with those by just the general population.
Well, that's a good question, and we thought about that. Here's the problem, okay? If you back up into a pole in your driveway, are you going to report that to your insurance company or file a police report?
Probably not.
We do. We report it. And so that's the problem that lies, is that the standard is completely different. So we thought about doing that. We thought about looking at miles driven by the average public in terms of crashes. We just can't do it because we have two different standards at play in the data.
Okay, fair enough.
Here's all crashes in the city limits. Now, I've got the 2017 projection going down. We haven't gone through our winter months yet, so I fully expect that number to go up. These are miles driven by police vehicles. So you probably are asking, wait a second, we've got fewer officers since 2012. Why are we seeing an increase in miles? We have noticed, without doing any type of calculation, because we don't have 10 years worth of data for me to be able to put an R value to any of this, okay, is that with our sworn count going down, our miles driven is actually increasing. And the reason why is because the priority one calls are also increasing. So this is telling us that officers are driving further to get to their calls for service. Now, if priority one calls and the number of officers decreased, you would probably see things plateau in terms of numbers miles are driven. But the fact that we have fewer miles being driven, or fewer officers, is indicating that there's an increase in the miles driven by our officers, which also increases the probability of them being involved in a crash.
Now, if you had more officers, would they be distributed So let's say a precinct within, I don't know if that's the word you use here.
Area command?
Well, but the subsets within the area
beat or the
command.
sectors. Yeah, and we've got, so within an area command, we'll have sectors, and then within the sectors, we'll have beats.
So if you had more officers, you would have more per sector, correct?
Correct.
Right,
And-
so
and I'm
that
not-
way, that means that when somebody needs backup, they come from farther, from perhaps a different sector.
Absolutely. So if your call volume does not increase and your officer count decreases, beat integrity starts to loosen up because we have multiple officers going into different beats. Now, I will say this. If you go back and look at the data, the number of officers assigned to Field Services Bureau in terms of the ones that bid it have pretty much stayed plateau, even though our overall count of officers has decreased because we've reallocated how we deploy the resources. But the problem is the priority 1 calls continue to increase based on looking at this data.
And that's curious too. Drilling down on the why priority 1 calls going up is interesting.
Which is a whole nother study.
Yeah.
Property damage paid. This is property damage paid, includes all damage to vehicles and property paid by risk management. I do need to have a disclaimer. These numbers could very well fluctuate. Sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years for claims to get paid. But I just want to present the data so you have it as of this date. This is the property damage that's been paid. Okay, this is priority 1 calls for service. Don't expect this to change too much. This is what we're looking at. We had about 65,000 priority 1 calls for service in 2013, and now we're projecting that they're dealing with as many as 74,000 priority 1 calls for service in 2017. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Having done a fair number of ride-alongs, I'm beginning to understand the priority system, and I don't know if there's any way of changing it, but it seems to me that a lot of priority 1 calls aren't really priority 1. That is to say, if a robbery has occurred 6 hours ago and it's discovered, is that a priority 1? It seems as though they're classified that way, and you got to run quickly to it. But
so the
why?
basic definition of priority 1 calls is any immediate threat to any life or property that might exist. So offender present. Now that has fluctuated over years due to administrations and due to what's being considered a priority. I do know that the department has been looking into, and I don't have the specifics of the priority system and whether or not we should stay at a 3-tier or 5-tier priority system. So that's something that's constantly being examined by our communications director, Erica Wilson. Property damage paid per APD involved crash. I put this graph in here because it was requested, well, how serious are these crashes? Well, how do you measure how serious a crash is? Do you do it by injury? Well, the best value that we could put together is, well, because injuries are negotiable, and whenever there's bodily injury, as it's been explained to us by risk management, it could vary based on the negotiations with the attorneys and insurance companies. So we tried to just do it to property damage paid, because that's it's not as negotiable as what injury or bodily injury or claims or medical or bodily injury claims could be. So per crash, this is what we're averaging, in terms of each crash and what the property damage was paid on all APD involved crashes. And again, those numbers could change as claims get settled. Yes, sir.
How does this reflect the total cost of a crash?
How does this reflect the total cost of a crash?
Right. The property damage is what fraction of the total cost, in your opinion?
It varies. I'm probably not the best person to talk about that because I'm not a risk management expert. But we could run the calculations. If you look at the very first slide in terms of if you take the medical liability and the property damage liability and take a look at what that cost would be, it could very well fluctuate. Now, the thing I want to point out is that one crash will be an outlier in the data. And what do I mean by that? Obviously we've had some tragedies in our community where, the city has paid a very high amount in terms of medical liability and bodily injury paid. One crash that could cost the city $8 million would definitely throw off that statistic for you. So I was avoiding doing that because I didn't want to give you bad data.
So this is a per crash estimate.
Per crash, property damage only. Because
Okay,
medical
so in
is so
2013, the average of that year was $900, a little over $900.
$900 of property damage paid, not medical.
That was the average for all of the property damage on a per incident basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and how many crashes does this reflect, this number?
Yeah, good question.
This number, in 2016, we had 304 crashes. Okay, so we looked at 3 possible factors here. We talked about priority 1 calls, we talked about all collisions in the city of Albuquerque, and we talked about miles driven. So what I'm going to do is show you how that relates per crash. So this is APD involved crashes, and these are priority 1 calls. This is APD involved crashes compared to all crashes in the city of Albuquerque. This is APD involved crashes compared to miles driven. Now, these are the factors to consider. So, our baseline is we know that APD involved crashes are increasing. That's a fact. What could be some factors? Well, here are the possible factors. Priority 1 calls, miles driven, all crashes in the city of Albuquerque. You can see how they trend and make your own conclusion. For us to draw a correlation, I would not feel comfortable with 4.5 years of solid data. I would feel a lot more comfortable with 10. But for me to be able to sit here and say, we're involved in more crashes because of priority 1 calls, because of miles driven, or because more people are crashing in Albuquerque, I can't say that. I think it's best that the board looks at the data and draw its own conclusion. And everyone can look at the data and draw their own conclusion as well.
And what did you say was the percentage increase in crashes? That was back somewhere.
For crashes,
Yeah, that the percentage of crashes had gone up in 2016.
it was a little I think it was 40, and I could look at the other slide. I believe it's over 40% for all crashes, and preventable crashes went up a little over 30%.
Is it in there?
Yes, sir.
I may be a little bit slow, but I'm back on the property damage paid per crash, and I see it going down from $900 per incident to about $400 per incident.
Yes, sir.
And I'm aware that if I ding my side mirror, that's $1,000. And I don't understand how you can get off with only $400 per collision. I mean, that would have to be a fly speck on your bumper.
But
at today's prices.
But the thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to be the one that your insurance company deems at fault, the city risk management's not paying for that. It's your insurance company paying for that mirror, not ours. So if you're involved in a crash with an APD vehicle, okay, and your insurance company is paying for the damage of your car because they deem, not our risk management, that you're at fault, then we're not paying that property damage to your vehicle.
So this is the only when APD is deemed to be, by the insurance company, to be at fault?
Or by risk management, and I'd have to refer you to risk management to explain that data even further.
Okay.
Okay, because I do not want to speak out of school for risk management because we've gone around and around on how to calculate this.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so other cities, as a part of the analysis, we sent out several emails to police listservs, including all chiefs of police, police researchers, and police managers. Agencies were asked these questions, and you can see those questions there. Number of crashes, number of those crashes that were deemed by your agency preventable, number of crashes that involved any type of injury, number of those collisions that occurred off duty. Does your agency have take-home cars for every officer? The number of marked vehicle currently in your fleet. So Louisville, Columbus, Cincinnati, Oklahoma City, Tucson, Newport News, and El Paso responded. Miami-Dade kind of responded, and all they said was they gave me like 2,000 crashes, and that was it. So I did not include them in this report. Now, here's the issue. Now, Albuquerque ranked lowest in terms of the percentage of crashes in which the agency determined was preventable. However, it ranked high in the number of crashes when compared to the size of jurisdiction and the number of officers. It is difficult to look at this data from the other agencies and draw conclusions as to whether Albuquerque has a high crash rate, and this is why. In Louisville, they don't consider that little fender bender example I gave you as an example of would be a crash that would be reportable. They just don't. None of these other cities, just about all of them with the exception of Tucson, and I'll talk about Tucson here in a bit, they're in the same issue that we're in. They don't have the data. They can't tell me number of crashes involving injuries. They can't tell me whether or not their officers were on and off duty, and I'm going to show you that in a chart. There's no consistent standard method amongst these agencies in how they determine whether crashes are preventable, and some agencies have various versions of the take-home car policy. So would you consider Louisville with a take-home car policy if it doesn't give a take-home car to officers that have less than 5 years experience? How do you equate that to the situation that we're in? And they also change in what they consider a marked car. We consider anything that has the word police or emergency equipment on it as a marked vehicle. Louisville does not, because one thing they don't have, like we do, is a robust PSA2 and PSA1 program. So there are so many different variables to be able to do a comparative analysis with the cities. Now that said, I simply put the data in this chart. Here's the data. This is what it is. Now, when you see NA, they simply don't report that. So Columbus, Newport News, off-duty crashes, or how many crashes were off-duty, they don't keep track of that data. And then in some cases where you see a DNA, that means they did not answer. I
want to recap because I want to make sure that we all get this. So whether or not an accident is reported, a type of accident is reportable for a police officer in other cities differs from our definition. They differ from each other.
Absolutely.
As well. And then if it is reported, which could be a lower threshold for us, if they do report it, how they report it, whether or not it's preventable is another question.
Correct.
Okay, so it really is apples to oranges.
It is. And through all the research that I've done, there is not a standard across the country. Now, there's been a lot of studies done by the Sheriff's Association, NIJ. They have done studies over decades. And when they've done those studies, they had to take each individual report and look at them individually. They couldn't just take a sum of data and do their analysis. They spent a lot of money trying to make those, the conclusions that they made in their studies.
You and I visited about this earlier. I really do think the International Association for Chiefs of Police could be taking a look at this, because I think it is a cost factor in their budgets, and I think to the extent that that's useful and can prevent accidents, that would be a good thing for there to be some kind of universal
Absolutely.
data system.
And there's been a lot of studies that have been commissioned, sponsored by IACP, that I've been able to find over the years.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing is traffic collisions is the #1 killer of police officers, with the exception of gunfire in the nation. And it's increased.
Point brought up by Dr. Ring at one of our previous meetings was we keep really good track of officer-involved shootings, but we don't keep track of accidents that can also lead to death, which was, I think, a direct quote from you, sir.
Yes.
So I think it really is important, especially as we see those numbers go up.
And thus far nationwide, I checked yesterday, we were at 6% increase in number of officers killed in traffic collisions this year compared to last year. So not all is lost with looking at the other agencies. One agency in particular that I was quite impressed with, and I'm going to put a question mark best practice, was Tucson. They track absolutely everything. They can tell you the age group, and if you see in this frequency distribution table, they could track the age group of their officers and tell you, okay, what age of officers is getting in more crashes. That time of day frequency, they can tell you that on Wednesdays and Thursdays between 1200 and 1800 is when we're seeing a high amount of crashes. They can tell you the ranks. These are questions we can't answer right now. They can also tell you if the injury to another party, if there are previous crashes involving injuries. All these are questions we can't answer. They can also tell you if the officer was wearing a seatbelt. They can tell you if the officer was en route to a call. All these are very important in trying to identify what could be some type of causes, and whether or not changes need to be made either to equipment, because we have seen a lot of that there have been equipment failures that have caused crashes over the years by studies done across the nation, or if there needs to be a change in policy or training. And the more data that's collected, the better decisions that obviously can be made in reference to that. So moving on to the observations. 2016, yes, had the highest number of preventable crashes and the fewest number of officers. Thus far, property damage paid by risk management has continued to decrease in 2016. However, if risk management was here, they easily will tell you that very well could change. Okay? 2013, statistically of this period, was the worst of the study period. It ranked the highest in miles driven per preventable crash, property damage paid per crash, total medical paid per crash, the number of crashes involving injuries, priority 1 calls per preventable crash, and it also had the highest percentage of crashes that were preventable. The data suggests that officers are traveling further to respond to calls for service. More analysis needs to be done to pinpoint exactly which calls were responding, or which cars were responding to which calls. Because remember earlier, I cannot take my mileage and get rid of any of those civilian or detective vehicles.
PSA.
PSA, for example. I would really want to be able to do that, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want to say there's a direct correlation to priority 1 call. I just can't. Preliminary data for 2017 suggests the city will see a decrease in all crashes involving citizens. However, no change in APD-related crashes, and an increase in priority 1 calls for service and miles driven will continue to increase in 2017. The majority of crashes are occurring in areas where there's a lot of crime/calls for service. There's no significant change from year to year on the experience level of officers, and every year the number 1 cause of collisions have been backing up. Backing up collisions increased 69% in 2016. Recommendations. I'm going to make these recommendations to my chain of command. After doing this study, like I said, I learned a lot, and I've been working with Lieutenant Sanchez quite a lot. I've also been working with Peter Innan and Brett Farglass over at Risk Management, and all of them have been very helpful, and we all, I think, are actually going to be working to make some changes. But certainly the department could adopt a better record-keeping system to track the following data: the age of officer, general cause of collision, whether injuries were involved, if the vehicle's marked, if the officer was en route to the call, road conditions. This data is collected but not entered into electronic database such as SharePoint. Operations Review already had a meeting on this Tuesday. They've actually had 2 or 3 meetings to try to make this happen. Once we have a data collection system in place, data, in my opinion, should be analyzed on a quarterly basis to see if any trends exist. Operations is already addressing some issues that they discovered due to this study and are taking certain training actions because of that. If you have any questions of that, I would have to refer you over to Lieutenant Sanchez. It's impossible with this time period and data provided to draw direct correlations to any one factor. The limited data provided suggests correlations can be drawn between miles driven, calls for service, and number of officers. However, we would need a larger sample. A more comprehensive study in which each individual report is examined could be beneficial to decision making, and the police department could certainly continue to work with the Citizen Police Oversight Agency analyst or whoever you deem appropriate to accomplish this. And my shop is more than willing to work with whatever analyst that you hire or appoint or contract with to make sure that they have the adequate knowledge and the ability to gather the data as well.
I thank you, TJ. I would like to hear from Lieutenant Sanchez, particularly because I know you've been implementing some things as officers who've had repeat accidents, and I know you've been working on that.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. TJ, we need to answer the questions people have.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for stopping me.
I was wondering if it would be useful to you, I know, to visit Tucson and look at their system. I'm interested in their algorithms of how they, collected their data, because that data is very, very interesting to me. And I'm with you. I don't know if it's state of the art or best practice or whatever, but it'd be really interesting to know.
Absolutely. They did send me a downloadable file of all their data so I could take a look at it. It looks very basic in terms of their collection method, but there's nothing wrong with basic. If you're collecting the data and it's easily accessible, you can do a thorough analysis. So I would agree, Dr. Garcia, we'd love to be able to go to Tucson and ask them more questions, specifically in what they're doing with this data. They told me that they haven't really noticed too many trends here lately, but certainly they're able to know that because they have all the data. Yes, sir.
Dr. Cass.
You didn't, I don't find, I feel kind of out of sorts here, but I don't find any reference to medical costs, and you mentioned in here that.
If you look at page, I believe it's the one that says raw data.
Oh, okay.
I did not take out medical costs because they are such a fluctuating number, but I did provide the raw data to you.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay? So if you look at total medical, that's paid as of to date.
Oh, okay.
So you see that 2013 number that I was talking about, how we have an outlier? That 2013 would give us a huge outlier. When I'm dealing with a 5-year data set, it's going to skew absolutely everything.
Right. No, I understand, and I just wanted to know if there was a reference to it. I didn't see it in there. But I have a couple of other questions, and that is, I'm a physical scientist, so usually at the conclusion of these kind of talks, you say, well, we need more data, and this.
And that's what I said.
and you said that was your obligation to say that, and so this is a friendly question. I mean, given what you've seen so far, what flags do you see? And then I've got another one, and that is my naivete about trend analysis for these kinds of data. What would be a flag? What would be a trend analysis that would raise a flag or raise a question that would result in a policy change? So which one of these trend analyses that you show here might be something that would, if it were stronger than it's shown, but which one of these sets of data would indicate the necessity that you might have an actual policy change?
We certainly have not identified one that, certainly if we were able to, and we could probably, with you being a physical scientist, we could probably talk about data till we turn blue. That's how much I love data. Certainly, if we had more actual years to be able to calculate an R-score, for example, we could certainly say, okay, do we need to address policy, in terms of how we respond to certain calls. But the other issue is resource allocation as well. If we know that we're traveling further miles, certainly the data could be used to look at certain decisions that are made in terms of resource allocation, which could definitely be a factor. So I don't think it's a hard stretch for me to say the more miles we drive, the more crashes we're going into. If we could somehow affect that miles that we're driving to all these calls, certainly that could very well have an effect. And that would be somewhere I would definitely start. If I had to make a recommendation, now I'm not a politician or a professor, and I try to stay away from that, drawing conclusions, but that's something I would continue to look at as an analyst.
Oh, there you are. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I did. I have one question. In regards to, you indicated that the Valley Northeast Command, on the pin chart, their crashes are occurring in the crime area? Oh, southeast?
Yes, sir. It's the southeast and the valley had the highest concentration when we did a hotspot density map. We do have a small area right there at Manal and Carlisle, I believe. But if you go down, our highest density and levels of concentration, we had a little spot up there in the North Valley Area Command. We have a lot downtown.
And my question is, are you addressing that at all, now that you know this information?
We're certainly making this data available. I don't know if the density of calls are happening there, the density of crashes are happening there. I'm not quite sure what can be addressed at this point, other than that we have this information and we're making it available. Further research would have to be done to see if there's any, and I think where you're getting at is environmental factors, such as, am I right, such as traffic, or is that what you mean?
Right.
Okay. Certainly we're going to make this data available to traffic management, but I would also want to see an overlay of all those crashes in the city of Albuquerque to see if they correlate to where there could indicate whether or not there are any environmental factors. Because it's certainly, we don't want to come to a false conclusion and say that there's an environmental factor when that could just simply be where we get a lot of calls for service. We would have to take what our environmental data set would be, and that would be all crashes, do an overlay and make that determination. But that's certainly something we could continue to do and work with Department of Municipal Development to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I have only a comment, and I really thank you for the, jumping in and doing the work that you did. I just would caution everyone, and just because I'm the worry ward here, but just don't extrapolate beyond In this case, it's data, but it's demographics. So you can't extrapolate it to, you just don't extrapolate beyond the data at this point. We're not there yet. And I do appreciate that you've done that much work. But I just don't want people to draw conclusions that are not founded in some kind of framework.
Absolutely. And, you know, the analysis that, or the example we like to say is, well, you know, it's easy to look at something and say that's a factor. It would just be the same as saying, you know, ice cream sales go up in Chicago and murders go up in Chicago. So obviously they have to be related. Well, there's another factor to that, and that's the heat, which obviously causes ice cream sales to go up and homicides to go up. So just to use that very simple elementary example, you know, it's important that you're right, we don't do that, and we take into account what all possible factors could be.
Any other questions? I'd like to hear from Lieutenant Sanchez about what you've learned about those who have had multiple accidents in a short period of time.
First of all, good afternoon. I really appreciate the help that we've actually received from you and the support that we've received from you when we've been addressing some of these issues, and especially getting this data together. We really do appreciate that opportunity. Now, there's a couple of things that I know there was a couple of questions that I would like to go back to with regards to some of these hotspots, especially in the Valley Area Command. And like TJ said, it is hard to pinpoint why they're happening, but there could be the Valley Area Command, for example. A lot of our officers from all other area commands drive downtown, and there's several reasons for that. You have the main police department, you have the prisoner transport unit. A lot of that personnel at one time or another may make it into the Valley Area Command. So it would be hard to try to pinpoint that. With regards to what we're doing and what we have, what we took out of this data, we in fact have made certain steps because of this data. We have taken certain steps. For example, we did send out a special order not too long ago with the way that we were going to be reporting our traffic accidents. There was a lot of confusion as to how we were documenting those accidents. And in order to be able to retrieve and obtain and keep better data, we changed the way that that reporting system went. So what it would do, it would prevent us from missing certain reports. Back in the times where we had hard copies, everything didn't always make it to where it was supposed to go. But now that it's electronic, it makes it easier for us to track it. And it has allowed us to see some of those situations and where officers have had several accidents. We have addressed those, and I'll give you the same example that I gave you before. We had an officer that had a couple of accidents, several accidents within a short period of time. Well, my detectives were able to see that. They came back to me because of the way that we had started recording some of this and said, sir, this is what we've seen, and what are we going to do? So we sent that back to the chain of command and determined that this officer needed to go through some driver training. So he was sent through our what we call an EVOC class. It's Emergency Vehicle Operations course. And so that officer was sent to that. So we have taken some of these steps. We're still working on the process and on how we're going to implement it into our procedures, because we have to ensure that we abide by the contract too. Because now we have to determine, look, we have situations where is it going to be a discipline issue or is it going to be a training issue? And so we have to be very careful. So we are working towards that. And what we would like to accomplish eventually is say, okay, we need to make sure that we reduce every accident especially if there's officers that are having multiple accidents, and that we are going ahead and making sure that we're preventing that.
When Commander McCrae was here, he talked about, we asked him this question about the training, and what he said to us was, there's a computer training, and I know you're talking about driving training, that's real driving training, and so I just want to make that distinction that there's multiple
Right.
different things you have available to increase the training and make it situation appropriate.
Right, and it is. The defensive driving training, there is one course that the officers, in order to renew their city operator's permit, they have to go through the defensive driving course, which is on a computer. There are certain situations where that may be an option. For more serious situations, should I say, as far as this incidents where officers are having multiple accidents, we're still working on determining what is going to be that threshold, what is going to be that level that we say, if this officer has 2 accidents in a 1-year period, do we have him retake the defensive driving course online, or do we say, no, I think it's better if we send him out to the driving track with an instructor, or is it 3? So we have to take those into account. Do we take into account the seriousness of the accident? So those are things that we're still working on, but we are working on trying to get to that point where we'll be able to address any training issues and any issues that any patterns that we're seeing.
I have a comment. I'd like to commend you on your willingness to work with us, and also that your commitment to transparency and keeping it real for everyone. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you, ma'am.
It is clear to me from having been through this process, and actually the 3 of us, and Dr. Brown also was involved in the focus questions, the initial questions. So I'm grateful that we were included from the very ground of this, and that it actually came from us through Deputy Chief Garcia, and actually ended up with a report that has some teeth to it and some real meat in there. Could there be more? Absolutely. You know, will there be more? Probably. It's clear to me that what was clear to me in this process was that risk management, the operations, which Lieutenant Sanchez runs, and TJ's Real-Time Crime Center with his professional staff really came together and everything was on the table. Everything that we asked was on the table, and I really appreciate that, and I believe them when they say they did not do this before and they see the value in doing it now. So I commend you for your work, I commend you for your willingness to do the work, and I look forward to hearing updates. Please come back to us and tell us what else you've discovered or other changes you've made as a result of this, or other things that you'd want us to know. So thank you.
Thank
We're grateful to you.
and we appreciate it. And we are moving on that data, on that collection. IT, Leslie in IT has actually been great, and she's starting to look at putting something together to where we're all going to be able to send our different data into that centralized location to make it easier to track and include some of that missing data. So we are, and again, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I just want to make sure that is that where the extra copies are, right behind you?
Yes,
Right
ma'am.
here? So media people, if you want copies of that report, you're welcome to it.
I did also want to say one thing. I do really want to thank the board. This is the first time I've worked with the Police Oversight Board. It was a pleasure. I look forward to continue to working with you guys if any other issues come up. It was a good change of pace for us because usually we look at crime data at the Real-Time Crime Center. So it was kind of fun to actually look at some different data. So I really want to thank you, and you guys were great through the process, and we look forward to continuing to serve you again in the future.
Yeah, I also wanted to thank you for all your work, and Lieutenant Sanchez, I guess, is behind you there. It's really a pleasure because I think we got even more data than we asked for. And I think along with what Chairperson Fine said, that it would be wonderful to have follow-up on this, especially, I'm especially interested in what you were saying at the end, Lieutenant Sanchez, about whether things are disciplinary issues or whether they're training issues. I'd love to hear more about that when you come back. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Okay, I gotta find my agenda, guys. Just hang with me for a second. Pardon me? Letter to Chief Edens. That's Mr. Harness.
Chair Fine, honorable board members, we've run into a problem with the investigative staff at the agency. Commander McDonald is no longer allowing the download of videos to our files for investigations. He is only offering view access through evidence.com, but that does not allow us to complete an investigative file, and it won't satisfy our obligations under the consent decree when the monitoring team wants to see the investigative file on which we base our investigation and our decisions, if in fact the video is missing and all they want to do is provide an uplink to evidence.com. Additionally, these videos downloaded are preserved and then have no issue with the automatic deletion if in fact there is not a case number assigned to that particular video. So we would like the board to address a letter to the chief to outline a protocol to go back to the previous standard to allow the CPOA to download and retain videos for investigative files.
Okay, I had some questions about this when Ed told me about this, so I want to make sure that this information is out there. And that is, my first question was, why do you need to download it? And the answer was more detailed than Ed just said right now. So when they do an investigation based on videos, based on everything, including videos, we all have access to evidence.com so that we can look at those videos. But that is time limited, and that access expires. What Ed is saying is that it expires for the staff as well, and they have an obligation to share that data, to share that information with the monitor, with the DOJ, in their reporting, is it just the monitor?
Chair Fine. Well, yes, as a part of our evaluation to compliance with the settlement agreement.
Okay, so we need to show them something we can't show them if this commander's new rule is allowed to go unobjected to.
I have a question. Mr. Harness, I don't see what the rationale is from Commander McDonald. Does he have one?
Yeah.
The Chair Fine, Board Member Garcia, the stated rationale is fear of evidence tampering, fear
on our part?
Fear of the chain of evidence being broken, and overall protection of the integrity of the video.
But up until when it was okay for us to do that? Up until, when did there be a change happen?
Apparently there was a change in the protocol after the Ronaldo Chavez affidavit in November. However, it just has been enforced over the last few weeks. So
Okay.
we've been downloading videos since November when the affidavit came out and there was a change in protocol. But for some reason, it's only been enforced over the last few weeks.
Okay, so because the police department's been accused of tampering with evidence, they're holding on tighter to that evidence. Is that your best guess of what he means? That they're holding on tighter to that and they don't want it to go out from there, even to the CPOA?
That's correct, Chair Fine.
Okay, I want to ask Mr. Baker a question. Doesn't the ordinance say that we have access for whatever we need, for whenever we need it? Isn't that a fair assessment of what they say?
Chair, fine, members of the board. I mean, obviously, it's worded a little more narrowly than that, but the gist of it would be that you need access to anything that you need to complete the agency's work.
So no
And so-
reason to deny us access is legitimate, is that correct?
Well, I don't know that there would be no reason, but I can't think of one sitting here right now that, especially because videos would be, in most instances, subject to a public records request in any event. And so I think it's something that is worth following up to determine what the basis for that change would be and
Yeah.
get it straightened out.
It's just, are we ready? Do other people have questions on this point? Is the best way for the board to write a letter or our lawyer to write a letter?
Chair Fine, the chief has certain mandates as it relates to the obligations of the board, so I would think therefore the board should write the letter, but certainly we could all collaborate on it.
Okay, I'm good with that. Anybody want to make a motion to that effect?
I move that we write a letter.
I second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Opposed, same sign? Unanimous.
Chair Fine, members of the board, just for clarification as we go forward, the instruction is for us to prepare a draft and get to the board, a draft that, for Chair Fine's signature, that raises this issue and seeks a return to the prior status quo, correct?
Yes. And I want to make sure that we outline the reason we legitimately need it, that we're not just asking this for the sake of, messing around. We're asking because we legitimately need it. And that's our reason for asking, so.
Thanks. That just gives the direction that the board has weighed in as a group so that we don't have to come back to another meeting before it goes
Okay,
out.
good. Is there anything else, Mr. Harness, on that piece?
Chair Fine, no. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much.
All right. Consent agenda cases. You ready to go, Mr.?
Yeah, I guess so. Chair Fine, I make a motion that we approve the administratively closed cases as presented.
I second that.
Any discussion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? None opposed. Cases investigated?
I make a motion that we approve the cases investigated as presented.
Second?
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously.
I also make a motion that we approve the cert cases as presented.
A second.
Discussion? Anybody want to pull any of those out?
I have a question about those.
All those.
Yes, because I believe, Chair Fine, you had some question about those, or am I wrong?
I think,
Did you get that resolved?
yes, Diane rewrote the one that I was concerned about.
Okay, very good then.
So, we're good.
Chair Fine, actually, I believe the discussion at the case review committee was that the cert cases were going to be returned to internal affairs
Oh, that's right.
so that they could be reorganized in a fashion that makes them reviewable for the board.
Yeah.
And in fact, the files were incomplete because they did not contain the Force Review Board presentation, and they did not contain the Force Review Board findings.
We all forgot that, but we remember it now. We were concerned, there is a problem in the way that we have access to the cases as it relates to cert. And first of all, the numbers are different. And so we get an email that says this, and then there's another number that's associated with it. It's higher math to try to figure out which number goes with which case when you're on the case review committee, or any of us, actually. That whole process needs to be simpler. And the Force Review Board, I think that was the understanding, was that the Force Review Board information would be in these files. And in all of these cases, and there are 9, 10, 11 cases, there was one of them had the PowerPoint that was done at force review, and the other 8 did not. So we did not have the benefit of seeing what the force review looked at in these particular cases. So that made them incomplete in our view. So that's why I'm so glad you said that, because I've completely forgot it was weeks ago. So we have a motion to accept and a second. However, will someone
Jerry,
amend the motion?
All in favor, you don't have to approve it. That would kill the motion.
Let's just kill the motion and
Well,
do it over.
You have to ask.
I withdraw the second.
Right. You have to ask, and all in favor would be no, and that would automatically. kill the
Okay.
motion.
All in favor? No.
No.
Anybody?
That
Okay,
kills that motion.
that motion's out now. Need another
Chair
motion.
Fine, there was also concerns about the lack of uniformity of the data as it's being presented to you. There are no common file names. There's no uniformity for the reports as they're labeled and as they're being presented, and that's a system-wide problem because as you get them and you get access to them, and when I get them at the same time as the command staff gets them, they're all in that non-uniform descriptive file format, which is essentially just a data dump where you have to go open the file before you even know what the content might be.
Yeah,
So-
there does need to be a rehaul of the way it's structured, because if we had to go through every single slip of paper, which is what's in there, that has anything to do with that case, we could miss without absolutely getting every single one. And I'm talking about, 30 documents that have, some of which have pages and pages and pages, to say nothing of the video that is also correlated to that. It is way more time consuming than it has to be, and the Force Review Board has to consolidate that information so that it can be presented at Force Review. So that consolidation would be really helpful. Also, calling the documents that are necessary to put in that cert file the same things overall, as that it's organized in some fashion, would make it easier for us civilians to actually understand what we're looking at, because we're opening everything and reading everything, and that may be wise, but I'd like to read the core of it first and find out when I'm reading document A that A may or may not be critical.
Chair Fine, who is the person that would correct that, or who are those
It would
people?
be Major Tyler.
Okay.
So, or I would accept another motion relative to this.
I can't put it all in a motion.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I would accept a motion.
I would
that-
like to make a motion.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I would like to move that the cert cases that we have been enumerating here would be reviewed, would be organized for us in a better fashion so that we can correlate the names between different files and different platforms. And that we work with an APD designee, either it's Major Tyler or her designee, so that we could have that at least in a sorted fashion so that we are not spending, for myself example, as an aside from my motion, is it takes about a day and a half to pull all the numbers together and make sure that they're all connecting. So the request is for better organization and better access to each file for each case so that we can review them in an efficient way.
In a complete file.
In
'Cause
a
they weren't
complete way, correct.
So that's her motion.
I second.
Any discussion?
And don't make me repeat that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I think I'm obligated for the record to abstain on all these votes. I just wanted to find out if that's the case. Because
Yes, you
it's a
are,
continuing-
until we
just
are
right.
resolved about the training. Whether the short version is done.
Just a subtle way of making the point is all.
Yes, we're trying to get there. I'm sure Major Tyler will tell us something about that. OIS, Office Involved Shooting Cases.
Chair Fine, Honorable Board, for Christopher Cook I-172-16, I prepared a letter concurring with the findings in that case by the Internal Affairs Review. That officer involved is actually no longer with the department, but I prepared a concurrence anyway. For case B, Rafael Molina, I-023-17, I also prepared a concurrence letter for the findings in that case. And so I concurred with the findings of the Internal Affairs Division in that case. As it relates to Dan and Gabaldon, I-022-17, you have before you a non-concurrence letter for that case, and I will detail my findings.
In a second.
That's it.
Yeah. I need you to recap it, honey. I can't read it here and remember everything. So can you recap it for us? Can you give us
Yes, I'm going to go through that. I'm going to go through my findings for the.
on all three?
No, just I-22-17.
Just this one. Okay, all right. So for the audience, when we concur, it means that the IA investigation or the CERT investigation or Officer Involved Shooting investigation, excuse me, we agree with what they found, what the department found. And in this case, we do not agree. And Ed's about to tell us why.
In the case of I-22-17, bless you. The shooting occurred June 4th, 2015. The multi-jurisdictional investigative team concluded its investigation May 7 of 2015. APD Internal Affairs completed its investigation August 23rd of 2017. The District Attorney's Office has not ruled on this case. This case does not have time waivers for the officers. This case comes before the board as a review of an investigation conducted by the Internal Affairs Division of the Albuquerque Police Department. The findings by Internal Affairs exonerate the officers on all counts. I do not concur with those findings. My non-concurrence is as follows. 2-52-4 deadly force. A, the decision to use deadly force falls under the general requirements for all uses of force as outlined in Policy 2-5-2-3. Additionally, the reasonableness of the officer's decision will include reasonable belief the subject presents an immediate threat to cause physical injury to the officer, another officer, or another member of the public, and that's serious physical injury. Probable cause for the officer to believe the subject has just committed a crime involving threatened infliction of serious physical injury to another, or deadly force is necessary to prevent the escape of the subject in order to protect the public or another officer. Paragraph B of that policy states officers need not exhaust lesser options of force in order to use deadly force. On June 4th, 2015, numerous members of the gang squad of the Albuquerque Police Department and other specialized units set out to find and arrest Dan and Gabaldon. Mr. Gabaldon was wanted on a felony warrant for allegedly driving a vehicle at an officer of the Albuquerque Police Department. The incident happened a few days earlier and caused the officer to discharge his weapon at the vehicle. Members of the unit, the gang squad unit and the specialized unit, were advised of these allegations. They developed information he was staying at a trailer at in a trailer at 98th and Central. Members of the unit, quote, sat on, unquote, the trailer, meaning observed the trailer, and eventually a male they believed to be Gabaldon entered a vehicle and drove away from the trailer. Members of the unit began to follow and track the vehicle. During this tracking, a member of the unit was able to positively identify the driver as Mr. Gabaldon. The sergeant in charge of the unit authorized a VBM. That's a vehicle blocking maneuver to stop the vehicle. All members of this unit were driving undercover vehicles without government license plates. Mr. Gabaldon continued to operate the vehicle within an adjacent southwest neighborhood. Members of the unit began to position themselves to perform the VBM. However, prior to executing the VBM, according to statements from the unit, a decision was made to conduct a, quote, high-risk stop, unquote, instead of a vehicle blocking maneuver. While executing this high-risk stop, Detective M collided with one of the undercover units by backing into it. He then exited his vehicle, placing himself directly in the path of the vehicle still under the control of Mr. Gabaldon. This is a violation of 2-52-4E, deadly force in motor vehicles, which states when the only means of assault on an officer is by motor vehicle, officers B shall not knowingly place themselves into the path of a moving vehicle or the likely path of a moving vehicle that is currently stopped but still under the immediate control of the driver. Mr. Gabaldon was still behind the wheel. Mr. Gabaldon drove his vehicle in the direction of Detective M. Detective M discharged his firearm at Mr. Gabaldon, striking the vehicle twice. The vehicle driven by Mr. Gabaldon then collided with another member of the units, the specialized units vehicle that was prepared to do the VBM. This allowed officers to temporarily contain Mr. Gabaldon. As stated in the Deadly Force Policy 2-52-3, it is incorporated as a requirement. 2-53H and I state, officers are expected to recognize their approach to citizen interactions. To recognize their approach to citizen interactions may influence whether a situation escalates to the need of use of force, and when practicable, officers must not engage in unreasonable actions or tactics that precipitate the use of force as a result of tactical, strategic, and procedural errors that unduly jeopardizes their safety or the safety of others. Detective M participated in the use of deadly force 2-52-4 Detective M precipitated the use of deadly force by his poor tactics and approach during the, quote, high-risk stop, unquote. The units should have requested a marked unit to conduct a traffic stop. He should have never exited his vehicle, being he was in the direct path of this driver. Findings. The CPOB finds that Detective M's conduct is sustained regarding the allegations of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. Detective H arrived on the scene after the VBM and while officers attempted to arrest Mr. Gabaldon. He parked just adjacent to the group of vehicles. Officers were using less lethal means to extract Mr. Gabaldon from the vehicle, including beanbag rounds and taser probes fired at Mr. Gabaldon through the broken out vehicle windows. Mr. Gabaldon was not complying with officer commands. Mr. Gabaldon exited the vehicle rolling onto the ground and simultaneously removing the taser probes. He then fled on foot and officers gave chase. Detective H returned to his vehicle to engage in the chase. Detective H passed the officers chasing on foot and caught up to Mr. Gabaldon. He then turned his vehicle to the right and struck Mr. Gabaldon with his vehicle. Mr. Gabaldon was knocked onto the sidewalk, and officers engaged Mr. Gabaldon to take him into custody. The striking of Mr. Gabaldon constitutes deadly force. Detective H did not articulate any perceived fear of immediate threat of death or great bodily harm to officers or the public. In fact, Detective M.K., the officer closest to Mr. Gabaldon during the foot chase, was asked directly by detectives if he perceived Mr. Gabaldon was an immediate threat of death or great bodily harm. He answered no, Mr. Gabaldon had abandoned his weapon, the vehicle. The CPOA finds Detective H's conduct sustained regarding the allegations of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. 252-6B, use of authorized tool states, officers will use only tools and techniques with which they have been trained unless the threat escalates so rapidly the officer must use any means necessary to defend themselves or others. Detective H's striking of Mr. Gabaldon with his vehicle was not a by any means necessary scenario. The CPOA finds that Detective H's conduct is sustained regarding the allegation of this violation, a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. Other issues, the use of electronic control devices, the taser. 2-25-6G states in part that the electronic control device is a use of force tool which is designed to use propelled wires or direct contact to conduct electrical charge to primarily affect motor function and or the sensory nervous system, and it can be used in 3 distinct modes. In particular, in this case, we're looking at the fact that due to the incapacitating effects of the ECD, officers should not expect an individual under the effects of the ECD to comply with commands. The device may also be used in certain circumstances in, quote, drive stun mode. This involves removing or not removing the cartridge based upon the situation, pressing the unit against an appropriate area of the body based on training, and officers must understand that when the device is used in this manner, it limits the effectiveness, is minimally effective compared to the standoff mode, which would be firing from a distance. And for this reason, the deployment with the probes is more desirable than the drive stun. However, the subject is, when using the device, the same deployment guidelines apply whether you're doing it in the standoff mode, firing from a distance, or whether you're using the drive stun. The same standards apply for compliance. After Mr. Gabaldon is struck by the vehicle, officers converge and attempt to take him into custody. Detective M and Detective P are observed simultaneously deploying their electronic control device, taser, on Mr. Gabaldon. Both are using the weapon in the drive stun mode. Detective P on Mr. Gabaldon's legs, while Detective M is drive stunning Mr. Gabaldon's neck and upper back. The officers are not allowing Mr. Gabaldon to comply with their commands. Instead, the officers continue to shock Mr. Gabaldon while other officers attempt to handcuff the subject. Additionally, Detective M strikes Mr. Gabaldon in the head with the taser. There were enough officers in position to contain and restrain Mr. Gabaldon without the misuse of the tasers. CPOA finds that Detective M's conduct sustained regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP which means the investigation determined by preponderance of the evidence that the alleged misconduct did occur. Recommendations and observations. The scope of this internal investigation is too narrow and needs to include a review of Detective P, Sergeant V, and the entire operation. The criminal investigation of this case clearly focused on the actions of Mr. Gabaldon and not the actors in the case. For example, there are no crime scene photos of the entire VBM, no photos of the truck and the point of impact where Detective H's vehicle struck Mr. Gabaldon. The IA investigators' analysis of this case should not be focused on Graham versus Connor or Tennessee v. Garner. It should be focused on the policies in place when the incident occurred. This is an administrative review, not a legal brief. The exonerations of these officers in this case further illustrates the monitor's opinion that the department lacks the ability to hold its officers accountable. As it relates to the discipline, for Detective M, 4 sustained violations, the first being a level 4, the second being a level 3, the third being a level 5, and the fourth being a level 2. And finding that the firearm discharge was unjustified. Recommendation is a suspension of 512 hours. Currently, there were no disciplinary issues within this officer's file, so all are considered a first offense, nor were there any disciplinary actions back in 2015 when this incident occurred. For Detective H, sustained on 2 violations, a level 2 and a level 6. A written reprimand for the level 6 and 240-hour suspension for the level 2. And as with the previous officer, there were no disciplinary histories within the officer's file for 2015 or currently, so therefore it's being evaluated on a first offense level. And I stand for questions.
I want to recap this. Sometimes I get lost in the numbers, so I want to recap this. So what I remember, tell me if I'm mistaken. At the end of May, there was an event in which Mr. Gabaldon ended up coming at Detective M with his car. That didn't happen in May. What happened in May?
There was a similar incident that happened in May, but it did not involve Detective M. It involved another officer.
But
there was an event
in which
the
this
reason
person,
for the warrant, for the arrest warrant.
Okay, so there was an event in which Mr. Gabaldon came at an officer with a car. Now they decide they have enough evidence to arrest him, and so they go to his place, they sit on his place, they see him, he takes off, they follow him, and now he is somebody who's come at an officer with a car before, and so and he's in a car, and he comes at the officer, and they fire into the car. So his weapon is his car, and that is a deadly force thing, and so they respond with a deadly force, which is firing the gun. They didn't hit him, and now he gets out of the car and he takes off. And they chase after him, and one of the detectives gets in a car and takes after him and hits him with the car. He is not in a car, so he is not armed. He didn't have a gun and he didn't have a car, so he had no weapons, and he was still hit with the car, with an officer's car. And then the 2 detectives zapped him when he was down already, zapped him with a taser in the neck and in the leg. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that is the summation of this case. And so the key ingredient here is once he got out of his car, he was weaponless. and deadly force was used against him. Fair?
Chair Fine, yes, that's my assessment.
Okay. I just want to make sure we get it in a tight roll.
I have a question. Did they actually use VBM?
Chair Fine, Board Member Waits, yes, they did. The incident happened very quickly. The shots were fired at the vehicle, but because there were other vehicles right there present, he ended up running into another gang unit vehicle. There was a collision, and then the other vehicles were able to come in and contain him.
And the reason I asked that question, it says here, according to the statement from the unit, a high-risk stop instead of VDM, instead of a VBM?
What is the difference?
Chair Fine, Board Member Waits, yes. Somehow within this operation, some of the detectives decided to attempt a high-risk stop instead of what they were authorized with the operation to do the vehicle blocking maneuver. And the high-risk stop is essentially like a felony stop where you would take cover, use the most precautions, have your weapons at low ready, and then order the occupant to comply with your commands to get the occupant or occupants out of the vehicle. In no protocol that I'm aware of does an officer conduct a high-risk stop from in front of a vehicle. That would be unsafe, and those operations take place from behind a vehicle.
I remember you saying, too, when we met at the Case Review Committee, that another factor that bothered you was that they were not in marked cars and they were not in any kind of uniforms. They didn't have anything that, so as far as Mr. Gabaldon is concerned, one could make the argument that he had no idea they were cops.
Chair Fine, that isn't, yes, that's correct. Until they exited the vehicle, they did have on their vests, which said police, and their outer wear, which said police. However, none of the vehicles were marked vehicles, had emergency equipment, or had government plates. They were all undercover vehicles. So you cannot leap to the assumption that he knew that the police were pursuing him.
Until he got out of the car.
Until they got out of the car. There's not a lot of verbal saying police until a few minutes into the execution of the VBM.
So are you saying that, to Leonard's question, that some of them did the VBM and some of them did a high-risk stop?
Chair Fine, that's correct.
All right.
Director Harness, what happened to Gabaldon?
Chair Fine, Dr. Ring, I don't know, to be honest with you. I mean, he was arrested and taken for treatment. He had a significant head wound, the origin of which was undetermined by the investigation. I mean, he was involved in a vehicle crash where airbags deployed. And so there was no determination as to the cause of his injuries, but there was a couple of head injuries and other scrapes and things along his arms and knees.
Didn't you say he got bopped in the head with the stun gun?
He was struck in the head with the taser, yes.
And the probes.
Injury from being hit by the vehicle?
Took the probes out. There's no way to know.
Chair Fine, Dr. Ring, that's not a part of the investigative file, which is, as I stated, incomplete.
Okay.
Did any of the officers get hurt? You don't know that either.
Chair Fine, there was one officer injured, but that was from Detective M backing into his vehicle, causing that airbag to deploy, where he had to crawl out of the side door and injured his ankle.
Backing up. TJ just told us about backing up.
I have a question. Mr. Harness, if the file was more complete, would it, do you think it would could change, these hypotheticals, I'm sorry, but could it change your conclusion? Because I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, based on the preponderance of evidence and based on that and an incomplete file, then you could make this conclusion. What niggles at me is at some point I don't understand is that the police have a right maybe or to when they pursue their duty or execute their duty. We don't know if if he's not also carrying another weapon or whatever, because his actions are already in motion and they're already in motion. So it just bothers me that you don't have a complete file and we don't really know other things. It certainly begs a question of better notation, better completion, better everything.
Did you think this file was incomplete or just the cert cases?
Chair Fine, I think that this investigation is incomplete. It focused on the actions of Mr. Gabaldon, and it did not focus on the actions of the officer.
Right, that's
Gotcha,
right.
gotcha.
And the officer's actions in these cases need to be scrutinized just like any other actor within the incident. And there's only one, throughout all of the interviews, there's only one detective that asks the direct question, did Mr. Gabaldon, did you perceive that he was an immediate threat of great bodily harm or death? And the answer was no.
But deadly force was used.
And during the VBM, the officers are using less lethal force at that point in time. They're using beanbags and they're using taser. And one officer, as a matter of fact, disengages from using the beanbag because he's in too close a proximity to Mr. Gabaldon and fears that that would be a use of deadly force. So post the vehicle being driven at Detective M, during the VBM and after, there is no articulation that Mr. Gabaldon was perceived to be a threat of great bodily harm or death. And that's according to the most contemporaneous interviews of the incident.
Okay. So, do we do one motion for all three? One as non-concurrence and the other two are concurrence? Do you want to do all three that way, or do you want separate votes?
Chair Fine, I think it would be better for separate votes.
Okay. Done and done. Regarding officer-involved shooting cases, I need a motion for case A and B, which are, there is concurrence between Director Harness's view and the investigation done by APD.
I move that case A, Christopher Cook, I-172-16, where we concur, be accepted as written by and presented by Mr. Harness.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Second motion? Rafael Molina? Rafael?
I have a motion to accept OIS case Rafael Molina I-023-17, a concurrence letter from Mr. Harness regarding this case be accepted as presented.
All discussion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Okay, case number C, Danon Gabaldon, 1-022-17. This is a non-concurrence, and I need a motion.
I move we send Dr. Harness's letter.
Regarding that case,
Yes.
I need a second. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? That passes.
I'm sorry, Chair Fine, just so the record is clear, all of these recommendations are based upon the policies that were in place in June of 2015. The use of force policies and the disciplinary recommendations are all in accordance with what was in place for June 4th of 2015.
Is it your perception that that the investigation done by APD was using a different standard? Or the standard that was current at the time?
Chair Fine, no, the standard was the same. The policies were, we evaluated it under the same policies.
That they did?
As they did, yes.
Right,
And
okay.
in the file, there was the June of 2014 use of force policy, which was in place at that point. And I just wanted to clear it up for the public and the record that this evaluation is being done on the basis of what was in place in 2015, not today.
Okay. POB review of Garrity materials. Do we have any Garrity materials? We do not. It is 5 to 7. I am thinking we should break. We are going to, during that break, we are going to meet with counsel regarding pending litigation or personnel issues. It's a closed discussion.
Do you want to do these, or you want to keep them?
I don't, it would take too long. Look how late we are. So, do I have to read this whole thing? Is that what I need to do?
So, Chair Fine, I think I would recommend two things. Just move to amend the agenda to move up and you could do it all through one motion. A motion to move up the agenda item on executive session to now, and then a motion from somebody to go into closed session, limited to the purposes set forth there, following the language set forth in the agenda. So just read it and then do a roll call vote. You could do them concurrently, and then we can go in.
Make a motion, Mr. Waits. Can we make a motion, Mr. Waits, that we amend the agenda to move this
Okay, I make a motion that we move the
item 13?
item 13 up.
I second that.
To now? And all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? At this meeting, it is a closed discussion and possible action regarding pending litigation or personnel issues, matters subject to attorney-client privilege pertaining to threatened or pending litigation in which the public body is or may become a participant pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 1015, 1H7, and limited personnel matters pursuant to NMSA 1978, Sections 1015, 1H2.
I move that we go into closed session.
Thank you. We need a second. All those in favor, you have to speak up, Dr. Cass?
Yes.
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 Sorry, guys.
It'll be short.
Okay. And then we'll let you know when you can come back and have some food, okay? I can't do it right now. Go back there. Okay, welcome back. We're back in session. And during the break, we had a brief closed discussion. And I need a motion to get us back in action here. Will one of you make a motion?
I
that we come
motion that
back
we
from
move
closed
back
session?
into regular business.
Second.
All those in favor, roll call vote.
Wait, sorry, may I just to interject
Do I
a
have to
quick point
read
of
it?
order. You just need to make part of the motion and confirming that the only matters discussed during closed session were those, and then matters subject to attorney-client privilege pertaining to threatened or pending litigation in which the public body is or may become a participant pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1 H7, and limited personnel matters pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1 H2. And that could be by incorporating by reference what I just read, but so you don't have to read it again if you don't want to.
You don't have to read it all again, he just read it. into
So
the
long
record.
as you vote to confirm that that's
Okay.
all that was discussed.
So we have a motion and a second to bring us back from closed session for the reasons our attorney just read. And we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor? It has to be roll call.
No roll call.
Start with you.
Yes.
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 Okay, good. Now, we've passed Garrity materials, reports from subcommittees. Outreach Subcommittee, Dr. Ring.
Our particular event of this month was all of us on the outreach committee, as well as some others from the POB, went to NACOL. And so we spent 4 days learning, which is part of the requirements of our keeping our training up to date. So that's what we did this month. Our next meeting will be on October 17th in the basement of the Plaza del Sol building at 5 p.m.
Policy and Procedure Review Committee, Dr. Cass.
There's a number of items on this agenda, and I guess I'd like to change the order a little bit from what we have here. In some discussions I've had, I just learned from Director Harness that the DV policy that we have in our folder was actually adopted at the PPRB today, so that changes that, and we can talk about that later. But what I'd like to do is talk about a policy process that I've written and introduced and has been circulated for comment, at least among members of the board. And what it is essentially a process for how we can integrate or I'd like to actually put it the other way around, how APD can integrate us into their policy development process. And I think that we need a place at the table with APD that's formalized, and that they are, and where APD recognizes that we have a special position that's different from the public, different from just another public input, and that when we make a policy recommendation, that it needs to be seriously considered and be part of the process that APD has. I'd also like to say that we can also, as part of, I think, our overall mission is that we can be a conduit for other public input into policy. And I think that touches on all the aspects of this board's duties, in that it's public outreach. Public outreach can go to community meetings and find out what the community wants, and then bring that back, and we can, as a board or as a policy subcommittee, we can start a process that tries to create policy recommendations based upon what we hear from the public. That's just one avenue. The other avenue, of course, is that we gather data, or we ask for data from APD in order to create policy recommendations based upon trend analysis of data that they furnish us. So what all that gets to, though, is that we need to have a definition of how we do all these things, how we obtain the data, who we contacted APD when it's time to create policy, and what is the process, and how does our policy process mesh with their policy process? So I think this really comes down to two parts that almost have to start simultaneously, and that is, one part is the process of defining what steps are involved in the policy process. And I've written out a 9-step process, whatever, that I've circulated, that essentially is the same steps that are involved in what we do, but there's a couple of additional steps. There's a way to integrate this into APD, and it's a little bit more defined than what we've had. It's written down. I think that's an important part of a definition. So at the same time, though, in order to implement something like this, we need to have essentially a policy written on the part of APD, which defines who it is we're going to contact when the time comes to get information, that deals either with get information used to create trend analysis, used to create policy recommendations, as well as just getting points of contact so we know where to go to get that information, where to go to get training. All aspects of the function of this board are affected by having points of contact and defined processes within APD. So essentially this is a test. I mean, what I've done is looked at the ordinance and the establishment ordinance for our board mentions APD about 30 different times in there. And it also mentions that APD has an obligation to cooperate. So what I'm asking is that we define the obligation to cooperate. And it's very straightforward, I think, in the sense of being able to identify those areas of cooperation, and then it's a question of getting a policy or getting APD to write SOPs that define how they're going to cooperate. So that's kind of the overview. So what I'm suggesting is that we have a process that I've outlined, and then that we test it with by getting a policy or getting APD to write SOPs that will help us conduct our policy process in concert with theirs. So that's where I'd like to start, and I'm interested in hearing from the board about what they think of this process. So.
Well, I met with Dr. Cass about this before it went out to you, and I was impressed by two things. I think we've had two things happening at the same time all along, and I think this creates a better way of us dealing with both things. One is to give input to the policy that the police department is working on. There are those of us who believe that the Power DMS is a way for us to correct the grammar and not the content. And so that, while it might be nice for us to do the grammar, that isn't really why we're here. And the other thing is to take the big pieces, the things that we would initiate, that would be things we would like to see in our police department, or issues we have with how things work, or finding out how things work that don't initiate from the police department to us, but from us to the police department. And I think what Dr. Cass has put together, thank you, really is a way to deal with both pieces of that, and be a part of their process, and also be at the OPA level with some input that's content-based, and then as it comes through the process, that it comes here to this board to be vetted. But the board would be, as I understand it, it's kind of like a white paper. Initially, the committee comes up, or somebody on the board works with the committee to come up with essentially what is the content that we would like to see addressed, what is best practices in other communities, et cetera, and that would go to the board and to OPA at the same time. And we would be able to get up, or to us first and then them or whatever, but the idea is that we're up on that in its draft form as it's presented to OPA. Am I right about this?
Yes, I think that sums it up. I mean, certainly it's a little bit fuzzy at this point. I mean, I think that's why we're here, is to talk about those issues. I think, timing is important, but I think also having something that's got some meat to it before we present it to OPA, with the caveat that given that we've put some thought into it, we would like them to put some thought into it and not just dismiss it, out of hand, or just ignore it, or deal with it for so long that we all get tired of waiting for a different result. So,
well, and the beauty was that that this does not negate. In fact, it adds to content in the beginning, but as it comes out from the APD process as a policy recommendation, we would have input as a board to that as well. To that, whatever the filtering of that information that we gave them comes down to, whatever that ends up in policy, we would have input to that as well. Correct?
yes. And the current policy process at APD is 352, I think, is the and
I think it's here.
that defines the
Yeah, it's in your folder.
Right, it's that one, right. And in a conversation with Elizabeth Martinez from the Department of Justice, she's mentioned that the Department of Justice position on this is that that's not an acceptable process until it's vetted with us in a real sit-down meeting that should be at least of a couple hours duration. So,
and I think, Mr. Harness, didn't you say that Jeremy had rewritten that part, so we are in it now?
Chair Fine, that's correct. If you look at the version of policy 3-52 that's in your folder, you'll see that CASA-related policies are to come to you after PPRB for a 30-day comment period, and allow for the board to comment on them within that 30-day period before they're moved on to the monitor and the Department of Justice. So on 352, you can look at page 3, which is the flow chart.
That's what it looks like. So we're in the bottom right corner there.
And then on page 5, paragraph 17, if the policy is passed by the PPRB and is CASA-related, the proposal shall be sent to the Police Oversight Board for their review and comment for 30 days from the date of submittal. Paragraph 18, 15 calendar days from the POB submittal, the CASA-related policy will be sent to the parties for review and approval. Paragraph
It means
19.
15 days afterwards, right? It says 15 calendar days from, but the implication is after, right? After we get it, 15 days later, it goes to the
Correct.
parties.
15 days from the POB submittal. At the end of the 30 days, comments from POB and the parties will be collected and will be reviewed by the Chief of Police or his designee. If the Chief of Police determines the proposed policy revision submittal is not feasible, unreasonable, or not in the best interest of the public and/or the department, he or she shall draft a letter to the POB and provide the reasons why the proposal was not considered. That's the
I got
That's
you.
the rewrite.
That's the part Jeremy
That's the
wrote.
rewrite for inclusion of the POB as an entity to review CASA-related policies in accordance with the settlement agreement.
and what is the primary differences? What are the primary differences
We weren't
between
in
the
it
old
before.
and the new?
Chair Fine, Board Member Cass, currently there is no provision for any policy, CASA-related or not, to come to the POB for review and comment.
I have a question. And was that sort of a compromise that it's only the CASA-related policies that come for review to us?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I'm not sure that compromise is the right term. I think that this is the proposal from the city.
It was what?
This is the proposal from the city.
Well, the proposal from the city. Okay. Because I think we talked about that there might be, in general, some other policies that aren't CASA-related that the public would be invested in. And so I wondered what happened to that idea.
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I think that the board probably entertains those ideas as well as the public. This is the proposal from the city to resolve the issues related to the CASA.
And I believe that the Department of Justice and the Monitor want to meet with us about this before they go ahead with it. So before they give their approval, that's what Ms. Martinez told us before the meeting. So some representatives from the board and the staff will meet with the Department of Justice about it.
Yeah, that's the way I would understand it. But I think that essentially this is a modification that only deals with the CASA related, as if that's the only important factor here. And what I'm asking for is an overt recognition that we exist as a board that has special influence on APD's policy process.
Whether it's CASA related or not.
Whether it's CASA related or not, exactly.
Okay, well, I think the ordinance gives us they may be writing directly to the CASA, the court-ordered settlement agreement. The ordinance gives us the right to do policy on everything.
I see the CASA as strengthening our position to do policy, and the ordinance gives us the obligation to do it as part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
The CASA is very helpful in that as well, but it should not be the only thing that should not limit us in what we can do.
No, I don't think anyone thinks that.
And that's my point, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone thinks that.
I think it's everyone's point on the committee.
Yep. So are there other feedbacks for Dr. Cass on his proposal?
I went through it and, excuse me, I thought it was very well written. It really gives a good overview. I like the part about the training, excuse me, the training aspect in your proposal, because we don't talk about that much in regards to obligation. Whose obligation is it, for the training of the board members, for example? There's a few changes that I mentioned to you that I would like to sit and talk to you about.
Be happy to.
I think it's, I don't hear any comments that are, that want to see any changes to what you've proposed. I think it's really a healthy start.
So at this point, I'm not sure what the process is for developing a process for developing processes.
Well, we can do a motion and say that we approve of this process, and this is our process from
I mean,
here on out.
I guess I'm wondering if this is what the formality of this is, as opposed. I mean, I've written I've written some words on paper that aren't in any particular structure that might be considered process. That's all. And so, I mean, does it need more?
The one I saw was actually a diagram. So
yeah, that's that, right.
But I personally, I think it's good to go. I think it's ready. And I think we tested with the policy you suggested, which was to try to get the, tell me again, it was to try to get the APD to actually name people for each of those parts.
That would be, yes, that's an important part of it. That's not the entirety, but it's also to define how they will interact with us in other situations. I mean, beyond just naming someone, I think that's a big first step. And it expands our access, I think, and I think that's important. I think some of the things are in the process of being addressed, for example, just getting badges and access to to APD, making access easier is an important step. But in my experience as a new board member, each one of these steps that I was expected to go through in order to be a fully qualified board member was something that I had to learn myself, or I'm sure I could have relied on some of the resources of the board, but basically I had to go through this process, and it was not obvious where you went to get those things done. And so I think the more we can define those points of contact and the obligation that APD is committing to cooperate and to furnish the training or furnish the information or the data, that's all those things that I think are necessary.
Well, I think to your point about orientation of new board members, come February, we're going to have new board members. Julian, I'm praying you're doing the vetting of that. And so we want to make sure that we have an orientation process for new board members that is very specific about what it is you need, and you should have been guided through this. I didn't know that wasn't happening. Perhaps we all assumed the other person was doing it. So that's the first piece. But I also think that as we need to have the stuff you were talking about with the police department, naming the bodies, and maybe we just look at it as I remember the suggestions you had the particular pieces that were in the ordinance that said, we need this, and that. And perhaps when we meet, we have set up a meeting with Major Tyler and Deputy Chief Garcia and the committee chairs, which would be Dr. Ring, Leonard, myself as chair, and you as chair of the policy committee. And perhaps that's a place where we can go through all of the parts and say, we need names for all of these places.
That I might mention interferes with the next policy subcommittee meeting. So we need to figure out which one of those we're going to change.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have a new one. I think the last time we met, we canceled that one that we had.
Well, there's a scheduled meeting for the 27th.
Yeah, but isn't that the one we changed? We said we're going to reschedule it.
Chair Fine, excuse me. It's on my agenda. There is a conflict between the working group meeting and the policy subcommittee meeting on the 28th. That was changed, and the agreed upon change for the working group was the 28th at 5 o'clock, I believe. But that conflicts with the policy subcommittee meeting, which is scheduled for the same day at the same time. So that conflict is on my agenda to try and address that issue.
Okay, so you'll get back to the committee chairs and me.
Well, I think the issue needs to be resolved tonight.
Okay, so that's in your report, though, is what you're saying?
It is.
Okay, so we'll get to that.
But if you want to handle it now, that's fine too.
All right. Well, Major Tyler's here. This working group thing has to be after work. I mean, it has to be after work. It has to be like 5 o'clock or 5:30 or something like that for him, for Dr. Ring. And where were we going to do it? We were going to switch them off, weren't we? We were going to switch off the working group between APD's house and our house.
I believe the next one was scheduled for the academy because of Major Tyler's training.
Oh, right. So what you're saying is the 28th isn't going to work either.
No, I'm saying the 28th could work, but then policy would have to change their date.
Okay, I can't do 2 committee changes with calendars with 4 to 5 different people right now. I don't know how we can do that. Can we do it after this meeting is over and get our phones together?
Sure, fine, absolutely. But I just,
Do you have a date to suggest?
What about the 27th for one or the other?
Well, for me, because I'm always available, that's fine for me. But
and we appreciate that.
After 5 o'clock, yeah. Major Tyler can't be there until after 5 o'clock anyway.
I apologize, but I'll be out of town all next week.
Okay, Johnny, can you come instead at 5:30 at the academy on the 27th? Major Tyler, can you do that?
I can make that work.
Okay, done.
Joanne?
Yes.
Before we leave this, I'd like to make a motion that we affirm Dr. Cass's policy recommendation process as a framework for future policy making by this body.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely need to do that. Okay, just a second. We need a motion to that effect.
That was the motion.
I need a
Second.
second.
Chair Fahn, just a quick point of clarification. Adopting it as a framework to try out and follow through this process works, and then if it's going to become a formal part of the policies and procedures, that has to go through a separate framework for amending.
We're going to test it out for a little bit.
Yeah, if you just adopt it as a framework, but just treat it as an informal framework to try out.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go through at least 5 policy recommendations before we decide if we're sticking with it, okay? Let's test it
It's
out.
our
Let's road-
informal framework.
Yes, informal framework, exactly. Okay. Dr. Cass, did you get through all of your pieces?
Well, I think the other items on there, if they're going to be considered again, can go through the new process. But I think at this time, you know, domestic violence, I think given that there's been many attempts made to make changes, and there's now a domestic violence, you know, approved policy that Director Harness just informed me of, a few minutes ago. We're not going to make any, significant changes to that policy unless we regroup and talk about what it is we want to see and essentially write a white paper, I think, that describes what changes
Well,
we
it
really
might
think
be
should.
wise for us to
So
take
we're
a
talking
look
about
at
something that I think is a little ways down the road. It's still important, but I think the
can
obstacle
table it for now.
is greater now, and I think there's other things we can do. And then I think you had on here, on the agenda, the promotions policy, and I think that fits the same category. I mean, that's a very complicated policy, and I'm not prepared to argue for or against it. So I think,
Okay.
if we deal with the first two, then we can go from there. So
Okay.
I'm finished.
All right, so we need to vote then. Did we vote? Okay, so I'm going to call the question. The motion is that we applaud and accept this informal trial of the policy process going forward. All those in favor?
Yes,
Yes, aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Okay,
Joanne?
yes.
Before you move on, I'd like to move backward, and I apologize. You have in your packet item 11A, which is the Community Outreach Subcommittee, a listing of the CPCs with their meeting dates and times and chairs and contact information. This is something that I requested that Amanda Bustos put together and provide to us. We discussed this at some length while we were in Spokane last week, and it appears that the CPCs, which some of us had tried and found wanting, have been reorganized or reconstituted on a different basis. They're no longer officer-dominated. They now consist of totally civilians. And therefore, it's felt that we as a POB ought to re-engage with them. And our recommendation as an outreach subcommittee is that the various members of our POB, first of all the outreach members, and then secondarily everyone, try to make at least one CPC monthly, and just simply to let the CPCs know that we exist, and that we're trying to coordinate, if nothing else, the input to APD because they're getting input from these folks as well as from us. So we'd like to kind of make it happen a little more smoothly. And I apologize, I left that out earlier.
Okay, so do you want people to sign up, let you know if you're going? What do you want?
That's an excellent question. I think if Amanda doesn't mind, I'd like her to be kind of the coordinator of that information so that as people decide to, yeah, I can make that meeting, they let her know so that she'll have an idea of what is covered and what isn't. And then if she can call me after the fact and say, you know, we were able to cover these three but not these three, and the next month I can suggest that we cover the three that weren't covered. Because we're not going to cover all 6 every single month.
Oh, you mean ongoing, to keep going?
But ongoing, yes.
That's a different commitment.
Yeah, we'd like to maintain a presence to let the CPCs know they're not out there by themselves.
Well, I think that's a big time commitment to go every month. And we already have a lot on our plate right now. So for myself, you know, I just went to the one at Holiday Park last week. So,
check that off.
but I wouldn't make a commitment to go every month. I can't. It's just too much time.
Well, I'm not saying the same person needs to go to the same meeting every
Yeah,
month.
but if you're asking us to go to a meeting every month, that's a lot. So
That's true.
I already have a lot of time committed to this. Why don't you tell us which ones you and your committee will go to and start with that, and then we'll fill in where you're not going.
Okay.
You can work that out with Amanda and let us know.
All right.
Okay?
We'll start working on this at our October meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, sir.
Chair Fine.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I was at the Northwest CPC on Tuesday, so you can check that one off. And in the Northwest CPC, the CPOA and the POB have a standing agenda item. So the POB and the CPOA are on the agenda every month at the Northwest.
Okay.
Good. Progress. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just an invite, you
Okay.
know, not a requirement.
Okay. Case review subcommittee. Dr. Cass, you are finished, right? Yes. Oh, thank you. Case review subcommittee.
I don't have a report since I didn't participate in that meeting.
Okay. Would you like me to do it for you?
Please do.
The case review subcommittee, we did get a request for an appeal, which the committee did not feel met the criteria for an appeal. So we did not grant the appeal, and that is for CPC 182-16. Yes, sir. Is that the same one? It is, isn't it?
Chair Fine, yes, but the committee only recommends to the full board to
Well, yeah,
not
that's
grant.
what I'm saying. We're recommending to the board that not be granted because there was no new information. You can't appeal on the basis of you didn't like what we decided.
Chair Fine, I move that we accept the recommendation of committee on the appeal of CPC 182-16.
I second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay. APD, reports from city staff.
Good evening, Chair Fine and members of the board. For the month of August, statistical data for the month of August, dispatch calls for service for August were 48,700, which was an increase from July of 1,982. Completed cases, IA cases for the month of August were 9. They were comprised of 8 internal affairs investigations and 1 area command investigation. We had 0 administratively closed cases, 0 cases that were mediated. For discipline imposed for internal affairs cases in 2017, there was 1 for verbal reprimand, 6 for letter of reprimand, 1 suspension of 32 hours, 1 suspension of 40 hours, 1 suspension of 80 hours, 1 suspension of 88 hours. There was 1 resignation and 1 resignation in lieu of termination. The reasons for all of those disciplinary issues were ranged from conduct and rules and regs, as well as procedure, preliminary investigations, the OBRD conduct, and there was 1 case that involved report writing, timeliness of reports, and evidence property being tagged properly. For EIS in July, there was a total of 41 alerts distributed, and there are 7 cases pending that were opened within the month of August. To follow up on a few of the other issues that were brought up this evening, I did want to clarify that on the cert cases that you received, the force review members do receive all of the case file just like you did. So what is presented at a force review board is just a presentation of those materials. So all of the members get all of the materials ahead of time and are tasked with reviewing the case in its entirety. So I think there was a comment made that, the force review board's only seen that presentation, and that's not accurate. The force review board does get the entire case file. I will definitely follow up with my staff to make sure that the findings of the FRB are included in the case files that you receive, and also working on the uniformity of the cases as well as the naming conventions of the files. I know that's been an issue, and we will work on that. As far as, I think there was a request to have somebody work with you from board member Dr. Garcia about the layout of the cases, and I will have either Commander McRae or Lieutenant Weber, who oversees CERT, reach out to you to set up a time that maybe he can do some training with you all on that. And that's all I have.
That's all you have?
Yes,
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Major Tyler? No? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julian, Mr. Moya, excuse me.
Chairwoman Fine, board members, the CPOA semi-annual report was heard by the City Council's Finance and Government Operations Committee last week, and it will be on the agenda for final receipt at the October 4th City Council meeting. In regards to the ordinance changes recommended by this board, our staff has met with Councilor Brad Winter and briefed him on the proposed changes. He asked us to seek comments from APD and the police union before introduction. We have not received any comments from them yet, but we will be checking back in with them next week as we prepare for the October 4th City Council meeting and hopefully introduction at that meeting. And with that, I stand for any questions.
I have a question. Guess what it is? February's coming. What's happening with the candidates for this board?
Chair Fine, our selection committee has not met yet in regards to those, but from our last appointments a few months ago, I think we still have kind of a top kind of 3 that we'd probably be looking at again. So we'll be meeting here pretty shortly to get that ball rolling, but it is on my radar, and we'll look to have those done in January in preparation for the changeover in February.
It would be great if we could get them through the amended academy so that we could actually, they could hit the bricks running. That would be awesome. I want you to pay attention to the CPOA report because that's on the agenda here tonight as well, and you may want to stick around for that part.
Yes, ma'am.
I assume no one is here from the mayor's office? City
Chair
attorney? Oh, yes,
think,
I'm sorry. I am sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay. Mr. Moya, the city council was a little upset with us for holding a political forum. Where's that headed?
Chair Fine, Board Member Ring, Councilor Winter introduced a resolution that would prohibit any elected officials, any city departments, any city boards or commissions from holding public forums. That was at the same Finance Government Operations Committee last week, and to be quite honest, I don't remember how it was reported out, what the motion was there. I can double check on that, but I would assume that it will be on the October 4th City Council meeting agenda as well. So Mr. Harness just informed me that it was deferred at Finance Government Operations Committee until next month's meeting.
Are they mad at us for doing this?
Chair Fine, I wouldn't say mad. I would think that the purpose of this resolution is just to clarify what the council deems as appropriate for city boards using city resources. I think it's just more of a clarification on what they deem as appropriate.
If it's not appropriate what we did, I would love somebody to tell us why, because it seems so logical to me. And so if there's I may be missing something, and I would hate that, because I could repeat myself, and I don't want to do that. I really want to understand what the problem is with it, and I was stuck that night in trying to figure out what were their rules for this room that are different from any other room anywhere in the city. I just didn't know. And all the checking I did ahead of time, nobody could tell me that there was anything not okay with us asking people who would be the mayor how they felt about police reform and civilian oversight. We weren't endorsing anybody. We weren't doing anything but asking a question of all the candidates for that purpose, and that seemed logical to me. So if the city council feels there's something that was a misstep on our part, I would love to meet with someone and have them explain it to me, because I don't want to repeat it if I'm missing something. I want to understand what the problem is with that, because there was no favoritism showed to anybody, it was just informational. And the general public can sign up and speak. So, it doesn't, and there's no restrictions on what they say. So, I'm not sure what we did wrong, if anything, and I would love to know more about that. Thank you, Dr. Ring, for bringing that up, because I did want to bring that up as well. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Moya?
I'd also like to note that was the highest attendance we've ever had in a meeting.
It was. The other thing I wanted to say about that meeting was, just to be clear, we did not ask security to come in with Mr. Silvio D'Angelo's sign. And I was also trying to figure out, was there something we were doing wrong with that? Because there was no disruption until the security people came in, as far as I could tell. So I didn't have a problem with him sitting there minding his own business with his flag. But if there's something we need to understand about that, again, I would appreciate somebody telling me, because I don't know what it is. Is there anything else on this matter?
Just a question. Is there any movement for recruiting at the Citizens Police Academy?
Chair Fine, Board Member Cruz, no, not this moment. I have been trying to close out another project that I'm working on, but I will get on that. I apologize for the delay.
Anything else on this from Mr. Moya? Okay. Mayor's office, anybody here? City Attorney's office?
Chair Fine and members of the board, I just wanted to make one correction on the report I gave. The EIS that I read to you stated July. It is August, so I just wanted to clarify that, but on the paper, and then my statement said for the month of July, but it should have been for the month of August.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Fine and board members. I think any reporting to you all would be 352. We look forward to continued dialogue on that. I think we're hopefully close to resolving that. With regard to the promotional policy, just to stick a pin in that one, there is ongoing discussions with city legal, the APOA, and the DOJ. Not so much the DOJ, but that policy is a little different, so you won't see that one coming around for a while because the judge had mandated the parties work out some sort of resolution with regard to language. So that one's not going to be coming up like a regular one because it was raising some issues that were arising out of prior litigation. So that one's a little more technical and it's got some legal issues that have to be resolved. So it's not going to be coming through the usual channels.
Which policy?
The promotional policy.
Oh.
Yes, sir. And then,
Yeah, could I
Yes,
ask?
sure.
About the promotional policy, we put in quite a bit of input about the whole idea of community policing, which we haven't heard whether they are discussing it, and we're no longer involved at the table. So how do we find out about that?
Chair Fine and Board Member Brown, the discussions that they're having, I don't think touch upon that. What I can try to do is reach out to my colleague in the labor division of the city legal department and sort of get a barometer of those aspects of it. I don't know that I can share a draft necessarily, but I know that what they're dealing with is touching upon the propriety of promotions, basically timing-wise. So if you're someone who was pre-settlement agreement, how is it going to be dealt with? And then if it is settlement agreement forward, how will it be dealt with? Sort of a retroactivity concern. I don't think they're touching upon any of that language. So if it was something that was adopted previously, it's still in there.
Well, no, it wasn't adopted previously.
Okay.
It was a suggestion, and, I know that the labor union has been very, very involved in this policy, like you're mentioning, but, so they're at the table, but we're not.
Right, and the reason,
And so that's the issue for me. Uh-huh.
and Chair Fountain and Member Brown, they're dealing with, and I don't have the filings in front of me, but the concern was that retroactivity and how to deal with that. That's the central issue that they're looking at.
What does that mean? I don't understand.
So basic, and I haven't worked that closely on it, and I didn't realize it was going to be discussed in a lot of detail. But my understanding of it is that if someone was up for a promotion at a certain point in time before the settlement agreement, how would that be dealt with now that the settlement agreement is in place? So it's a concern of retroactivity. Will it be, okay, well, it's not going to be considered through the lens of the settlement agreement, or will it be? That's basic. That's what I understand it to be. Okay. So that's the reason why it's ongoing discussions with the APOA and the city mainly, those two parties.
Then the process is that as soon as you get this settled about the retroactivity, will we then have a position to talk about the community involvement in this?
I believe so. I believe it will. And like I said,
before it's finally approved.
I believe so. And if we stick a pin in it, and I can go back and I can speak with my colleague to find out exactly, and also speak with Director Slauson to figure out where it sort of got pulled out of the process.
Yeah,
I
we
think
got
it
pulled
was,
out after the initial presentation.
Right. And so, and this is, Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, this is a mandate from the court. So unfortunately, it's not something where, we have a lot of say in how exactly it's going to move through the process. But I can speak with Ms. Holtz about it and figure it out, but more importantly, talk to Director Slauson so that once that language is sort of agreed upon, we can get it back in and have the community input that we had before.
And it would be important to make sure that Dr. Cass is included in that loop, Dr. Brown, and who else is on your committee? Eric. Okay.
Bill.
Those are the three on the policy committee.
Chair Fine and Dr. Brown, and Member Brown, if it's okay, I can email it over to Mr. Harness. I'll speak with Ms. Holtz tomorrow, and then I'll get an update on that. And then also,
Thank you.
I think Director Slauson may be out this week, but I'll make a note of it and report back.
Okay.
And then the only other thing I had was another meeting with y'all. I know we had a productive meeting where you had the concerns about the action plan, and we had, I think we addressed the majority of them, if not all of them. We'd like to have another follow-up meeting with y'all so we can continue a dialogue of making sure concerns like IA Pro access and those types of things are resolved quickly, so there's not this, I'm going to write something, and we're missing each other in writings, I think.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, we can do that. work it out with him, and he'll make sure whoever of us needs to be there.
Chair
that we
Fine, I
all-
already have. We've already had it.
Okay.
Chair Fine, is it possible that the city attorney be included in the working group meeting that we already have scheduled
That's a
on the
good idea.
27th?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Chair Fine, I'll go where I'm asked to be.
Okay, so it's 5:30 at the Academy on the 27th.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just had one quick question. When was the PPRB meeting that was held this morning scheduled? I never got a notice for it until it was happening.
Chair Fine and Dr. Cass, I think it was sent out some time back. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know. It wasn't something where it was, I don't know.
Because it was a
maybe
special
Director
meeting.
Harness.
As advertised, it was a special meeting, and that's why I was curious.
Yeah, I think it was given some notice. I don't know if Director Harness would disagree with that. I would have to look back at my emails as he's doing now. There was also an SOPRC meeting yesterday. So there was also an SOPRC meeting yesterday on those policies, and then the PPRB was today.
Yes, I was aware of the OPA meeting, and I was too sick to get out of bed, so.
Did you get your question answered, Dr. Cass?
I can see the wheels turning.
No, I don't have the answer right on me.
Are you waiting for an
Director
answer
Harness
from Director Harness?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Director Harness, bring us home.
Chair Fine, honorable board members, in your packet you have the proposal from the Institute for Social Responsibility to fulfill our data analysis responsibilities. There's a list of duties, and there is a proposal for the amount of funds necessary to fund for 8 months, essentially to go through the fiscal year.
Go through the, say it again,
To go through to the end of the fiscal year.
which ends in July, right?
Correct, right.
Okay.
So roughly, you can review the duties, you can review the personnel that they're proposing to be as a part of the team, and they're roughly proposing that the cost of that would be about $38,000 to contract with them to do our data.
Do you think that's sufficient? Have you gone through this all and you're satisfied with it?
Chair Fine, yes, I have. I've gone through it. I think it accomplishes what we need for data analysis. It provides a team for us to do the analysis, and it will actually be funded at less than our proposed step increase to hire a new analyst.
Perfect.
A question. And you've prorated the additional 4 months, like if you're going to anticipate in the next year that it's going to meet whatever budgetary, limitations that we might have?
It's
Chair
instead of
Fine,
the
Board,
position for Miriam.
yeah, Chair Fine, Board Member Garcia. Yes, in discussions with Dr. Guerin and Dr. Verplu, we anticipated that we would try this first on an annual basis, and then we would evaluate whether or not it would work moving forward, and if so, then we would appropriate the monies for contract service, and even adding on the additional 4 months for a year, it would be costing the agency less than hiring an analyst and providing city benefits at the step increase that we have proposed with HR.
Good. I think that's really good, and I'm glad that Dr. Verplu is there, because she doesn't have to relearn everything she already knew. So that's advantageous. Do you need anything from us on this? Anybody else?
I think I had a comment. I think you answered my question. We're paying for a group instead of an individual, which is a lot better. I think it's a better contract than individual. So.
Yeah, I think it's
yes,
really
Chair
smart,
Fine,
yeah.
Board Member
Especially
Waits.
Dr.
In the proposal, they outline the projected times and the projected members of the team that would be conducting the analysis for the agency, and they are outlined specifically.
I have a question. Mr. Harness, does the person who's like the chair of POB or the policy chairperson, do they have access to an individual, like is there a point person that they can talk to?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, yes, there are 2 proposed project investigators. That would be the direct contact for the agency or the board for any sorts of projects.
Okay.
It's projected that it would be mainly Dr. Verplu, and if not Dr. Verplu, then Dr. Guerin.
Thank you. Yes.
That's exciting.
That's great. Yes.
Yeah, I have a similar question, and I think it's just a little bit more general, and that is, do we have a process in place for who's going to initiate what kind of projects, or and what will access be? I mean, this isn't an unlimited resource. Is there going to be some kind of process for determining, what to present to them or what questions to ask of them? And if so, who should, how would you suggest we handle that?
Chair Fine, Board Member Cass, throughout the normal course of having an analyst, typically those types of requests would come from the Policies and Procedures Committee. However, there are other tasks that we have outlined, such as the semi-annual report, data gathering for projects and things like that, and the board would direct those, or I would direct those as the need of the agency.
There could also be things that would be identified, for example, in the case review committee, and we would send them to you guys first, and then that's how you would coordinate that. Because we may see some things that we think are a trend, and we want to know, is it a trend? That kind of a deal. I really am excited about Miriam Verplu. I'm very happy about that. Speaking of data, do you have other things related to your report that you want to add?
Certainly. Chair Fine, it's also in the packet, you have 2 versions of a mediation memorandum of understanding. These are both drafts, and they are both awaiting comment from the Department of Justice, Attorney Riles, so that we can hopefully present this issue to Judge Brack in November to start an interim mediation program.
Are we testifying in front of Judge Brack in November?
Chair Fine, if there are issues that we want to bring to the judge, then yes, that opportunity will be there.
And what is the date of that hearing with Judge Brack?
I have that on my report, so if there's any questions about the mediation.
Sure.
MOU that you have in front of you. Essentially what we've had to do is we've had to narrow the definition of complaints that can be mediated that don't rise to the level of misconduct, and the judge is going to have to allow us to carve that out from the settlement agreement's definition of misconduct, which is everything. And then the proposal that we've put together with the DOJ and the monitors and all parties is that we're going to try this for 6 months and then report back to the court with the results, including cases, customer satisfaction, all of those elements, in an attempt to try to make it a permanent project so that we come into compliance with the city ordinance. We have no response from the chief on CPC 093-17.
Which, for those who don't remember the numbers, is the findings of misbehavior by the PIO and one of the spokespeople for the police department, which you discussed at the last meeting, and that is relative to the case with Victoria Martins, the 9-year-old girl who was killed. So we have not
Chair
heard.
Fine, the 30 days has passed for him to notify us of the final discipline and his concurrence or non-concurrence. If there's a concurrence, he doesn't need to notify us of his concurrence, but he does need to notify us of the final discipline, and he also needs to notify the complainant. And to date, none of those have taken place.
So what is our course? We have committed to no dead ends. So is this something we let the monitor know, we let the president of the city council members know? What do we do with that non-compliance right now? I'm not waiting, are you?
Chair Fine, I think that this would be something that the board would bring to the attention of the monitors and the city council, because the city council ultimately is the enforcer of the oversight board's ordinance.
Okay, let's do it. What do you need from us?
Chair Fine, I'll draft a letter for your signature.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, problems, concerns?
Questions regarding
This issue of the chief not responding to our letter?
Not that, something else.
Okay.
Chair Fine?
Yes.
Just to authorize the letter to go out under your signature without further review, I would just take a quick vote approving Director Harness drafting correspondence for your signature addressing the topic that's been discussed. Then you don't have to worry about any procedural hiccups.
We need a motion to that effect. Am I allowed to make a motion?
I so move.
Okay. I'll second it. All those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Opposed, same sign? No. Okay. Director Harness?
Chair Fine, fellow board members, the IMR 6 timelines are as follows. The draft report will come from the monitor on the 2nd of October. Our responses are due back to the monitor by the 17th of October. The actual final report will be filed with the court on the 2nd of November. Any stakeholder concerns that need to be addressed with the court that they wish to address with Judge Brack must be presented by November 7th. And IMR 6 will be presented to the court on the 16th of November. That's scheduled for an all-day hearing.
And that's the thing when we go to the judge, right?
That's correct.
And what's the 7th?
The 7th would be for the board to inform the court if there are any issues that they want to present or have addressed.
Would you repeat the date of the hearing?
The date of the hearing is 11/16.
And you'll let us know, send us an appointment for those who can come?
Yes.
To that?
As soon as I get the specific location and courtroom, I will send that out.
Okay. Just send it to us as an appointment, please. That would be great. Is that the end of your report? Good. Keep going.
The agency is going to be conducting training at the Emergency Communication Center on the 26th of September and the 5th of October. I will be there to cover training for all 3 shifts on each of those days so that each member of the ECC has a better understanding of the board and the agency, how we function, and why we have jurisdiction over them. And last but not least, we have been requested to participate in a University of New Mexico class called Policing and Planning. We're going to need to reschedule our appearance because it's the same day as the court appearance. But we've been asked to come and present to that class on police oversight.
Okay. I don't know if Christian Moore is here. Is she? Oh, you are here. Okay, so I just want to let you know, speaking of classrooms and studies, Dr. Moore is with Texas Tech, and she, really, she and I have visited, I think she's visited with Leonard and with Ed as well, about a study that she's doing on police oversight across the country and what they're learning and what's working. So she's promised us some good information, Amanda, about the websites, the ones where she's looking into what information she can cull from those websites. So she has some ideas of which ones were easy and which ones weren't. And we have talked about some other things. So she's here today. She's also going to come back in November. When is it? Yes, ma'am. In November, she's coming back. So anyway, I just wanted you to meet her while we were talking about universities. What else, Mr. Harness?
I have two more items. In the weekly update from Internal Affairs, there are currently 22 open internal affairs investigations. And the last item is the semi-annual report, the 2016 semi-annual report. It was distributed to the board on the 28th of July, but it was not an agenda item for approval to move forward to the City Council. So I believe Attorney Jackson sent over some language for you to make a motion to rectify that oversight.
And I did see his email. I'm not willing to recommend something until we have it as a board item for approval. I think it's important, though I read the ordinance again today, there's a part of it that talks about reporting and talks about the agency reporting, and it doesn't mention us, but in the part that does mention us and our obligations, it says that we are responsible to look at any analysis and et cetera, and to approve it. So the fact that it wasn't approved by us bothers me. And there may be a motion that we could make that says, go forth and prosper, that it's okay. I, for one, am not okay with that. I would rather have time to actually see it. I did look for the original email and found it attached to the 228 something or other that was Dr. Ginger's report. And so it just said, please see attached. That's not sufficient for me. So I open it for discussion among the board members. How do you want to handle this?
So your comment is that we would like to see the report before it goes anywhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
It represents our work as well, to me, and we should be in a position to promote this, to have input to it, and we didn't.
Okay.
Chair Fine, with all due respect, I sent the board the semi-annual report on the 28th of July.
It wasn't an item on the August board meeting or the July board meeting. Why?
Chair Fine, the agenda is the board's agenda. It's not my agenda. It's your agenda. And while I suggest items for the agenda is set by the board, and that's very specifically been told to me over and over again that the agenda is your agenda. I presented the information.
Okay. As far as I'm concerned, from this day forward, my suggestion to the board is that we require semi-annual reports that go to the city council come to us first as a board item. And if the chair of the board or somebody else on the board doesn't remember to do that, I need the staff to remind me to do that. I do not believe that something should go to the city council that represents and says on the front of it, Beth's name, your name, POB, and we didn't see it. To me, that's not okay. And so I'm making a request that my suggestion is that we take the report and we review it as we should have in this case and in all cases going forward. That's my suggestion. What do y'all think?
I guess I got a little lost in this. I read the report, I thought it was great. I just made the assumption that it was going straight to the city council, and it was a point of information for us. I didn't,
Perhaps other people
analyze
feel
it.
the same.
I beg your pardon?
I said, perhaps other people on the board feel the same as
Yeah,
you do.
so I just am telling you right now how I was feeling about it.
Right.
And that's just my opinion on it, so.
Johnny's-
I also read the report and I felt comfortable with it. It didn't have my name in it because I guess I wasn't here during that time. But I read it and the graphics are really nice, nice color.
Yeah.
I had it printed in color, so good job.
Chair Fine, I agree with those two. I read the report as well, and it's Ed's report, Mr. Harness's, rather than our report. So the fact that our names are ancillary there too isn't germane. He's the one responsible for it, so I didn't feel we needed to take action.
It should have come to the board for review as a whole?
No.
Yes or no?
For information, yes. For review, I don't know.
What do you think, Mr. Waits?
I have no comment.
Why?
Just wanted to comment.
Do you think it should come before the board or not?
I think, I agree, it's his report. My name was on it, but, I don't have a problem with it. I really don't.
What do y'all think?
Chair Fine, it's my responsibility to read the report when it comes to us as an attachment, and I've accepted it as such, and I have no issue with the report.
Yeah, I've read the report and he was preparing it and I had no problems with it.
I haven't read the report, so I have no say. I'm just more worried about the processes from here on out and making sure that we cover our behinds and make sure that we can't be pointing the blame on each other when it comes to, well, it's your responsibility, but we should be watching out for each other to make sure that we have what we need when we need it reviewed.
Do you think that it's important that it come before the board? Even just as a discussion item?
I mean, we present everything else that you go over in your report. If it's going outside of the board, I think that we should have brought it up in the meeting, yes.
Sir?
Yes, I can't say I read it all, but I read some of it, and I approve of it. I think it should, as a matter of course, be rubber stamped by the board unless we have some serious objections, and so it should have come, yeah, it should have been presented, but I think that should have been an automatic sort of pro forma thing, so.
Okay.
Chair Fine, just some
Yeah.
background that I may be able to provide that both addresses this for a future process and also helps deal with the matter that's immediately before you. The policies and procedures call for the report to come to the board, but Matt Jackson's proposed language would remedy that at the point that the board is prepared to go forward and vote on it. And so, yes, as a matter of future course, the report should come to the board. It's in the policies and procedures that way. But that procedural hiccup can be remedied by the language that Mr. Jackson sent over, so long as that's the will of the board.
And it sounds like that is the will of the board. Am I incorrect in hearing that? That it is the will of the board that we take the action that Mr. Jackson has suggested, which essentially rubber stamps it retroactively?
Fine by me.
I move that we accept Mr. Jackson's verbiage that will assist us in the future.
Second.
This is for this night, is what it does.
Right, it would be I apologize, I don't have that language immediately in front of me, but, because I didn't print it out, but it, he had sent it out.
Let me find it.
While we're waiting, I have a question regarding
here it
the
is.
scope of work. If I could ask it. Is this finalized, or is this what this cost estimate was based on, the draft scope of work? Has that been agreed to already?
Board member, I'm sorry, Chair
sorry, I didn't hear the
Fine,
question.
Board Member Cruz, no, none of that is final at this point. Those are simply draft suggestions.
So what was the cost estimate based on? Was it this?
Yes, it was based
Okay.
upon,
I guess there's a couple questions that I'm worried about is the ownership of data. In 8C, it's, the UNM ISR states that the data will be stored on computers and servers on the UNM campus, et cetera. But who is actually in ownership of that data? Is it the CPOA or is it UNM? I think that needs to be clarified. There's also, I believe, is there any list of specific deliverables that you all, like reports or certain sets of data that you all need at a certain period of time? Because I think there isn't any hard dates that are in here. And so what I'm worried about is that they'll be able to do this work, but if it doesn't meet the date, the deadlines that you have set, then I'm worried about that.
I have a
Chair
question.
Fine, Board Member Cruz.
I have another
Yes.
additional question to that, because since I think that some deliverables can be identified, if I'm wrong, let me know. But there's some that we have to have an open door kind of rolling things so that it gives him the flexibility to ask for things. And that I see your point about deliverables, but then I don't want them to be boxed in either.
No.
Yeah.
No, correct. It's just, I think being a little bit more clear about deliverables and whether or not they're indefinite or a certain date that you need them, I think is important. It's just some things I had to see. And also if there's any trips, I know that I noticed that you had conference travel identified. Did you have specific conferences in mind, or is that just a general fund in case they had needed to go to a conference?
Chair Fine, Board Member Cruz. Certainly we can tighten up and put some expectations on dates for deliverables that we know we have by ordinance, so we could certainly specify those. As far as the question related to the travel, in the cover letter, it was the desire was stated to travel to NACOL with the idea that they hope to be presenting at NACOL and having some sort of a presentation based upon their work. But it was not anything that was firm within their negotiations.
Understood. I'll send you some proposed edits. I just want to make sure that we get what we're ordering, and especially in terms of deliverables and direction. Will the mayor's office actually be directing them to do anything? Because in paragraph C, it says they'll be providing assistance and responding to requests and inquiries from these entities and then the mayor's office. Will the mayor's office actually be getting to them directly?
Chair Fine, Board Member Cruz, no, I think that contemplates our obligations in reporting to the mayor, and the inverse that at some point the mayor's office may engage this agency to inquire about policing activities.
So you're the clearinghouse. You were the one who tasks them, and then you submit the data to whoever.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Fine. Because we've gone through the process of rubber stamping the report, I think I need to make a motion that we accept the draft report from Mr. Harness. A motion to approve and ratify its previous submission to the City Council. Does that make sense?
So you have two motions on the floor.
Oh, what was the first one?
What was the first motion?
The first motion was to accept the verbiage to go forward. And
Yeah,
I had a
but
second.
I found the verbiage. I'm sorry.
So we did not vote on that piece, and then we can vote on on accepting the draft to go
Well,
forward.
we have to close the first motion that's on the floor.
That's right.
Okay. So we call the question of the first motion
To accept the verbiage.
to accept the verbiage.
Given provided by Mr. Jackson, it was seconded by Mr.
All those in
Cruz.
favor? No.
Excuse. I'd like to hear the verbiage provided by Mr.
That's what we're doing
Jackson.
now.
Let's just close that motion out and then.
We just did. We just voted.
No,
No, did you got a no vote?
Yes, it's a no vote, so, because we don't want to do that. We want to put the verbiage in there.
Okay, that's what I was trying to put in.
Okay. We're tired.
So we have a no vote? The motion is dead? Okay, good. All right, this is the verbiage. It has come to the board's attention that I may not have approved the draft of the semi-annual report. Having reviewed the draft report, I would entertain a motion to approve it and ratify its previous submission to the city council. That's the motion.
That's Matt's verbiage.
Second.
That's the verbiage.
And we need a second.
And we have a second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
One abstention.
One no.
One no.
Good, thank you. Do we have to take another vote then? Are we done?
No, we're done.
It says, after someone so moves, discussion of the report and whether to ratify it would be appropriate.
That's just occurred as part of the
Right.
motion in order.
Okay.
There wasn't discussion, because you'd all had preceded the discussion.
Okay.
It just got, the order of it got flipped, but you've all now debated the topic, voted on it, approved it,
Okay,
ratified the submission to the city council.
I appreciate the
perspective, it's in order.
clarification that in the future, this will be brought before the board as a discussion item and for the review and approval of the board prior to its being sent to the city council, and I'll expect the staff to put that on the agenda for the board meeting as is appropriate for that timeline. Is there any other business to come before the board? There being none, I adjourn. We adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
I'm punch drunk. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Triple second.